Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm Robin Niblett, the Director and Chief Executive of Chatham House, and I want to welcome you very much to this special event on new ideas for NATO 2030. And I must welcome both the Chatham House members who are joining us today and also the many others who are joining us from around the world, I think is the best way of putting it. And I also want to welcome very strongly Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary-General of NATO, for this important meeting where we're going to be unveiling some exciting new ideas for NATO through to 2030. Before I sort of get into the meat of the conversation, we've got a lot to get through in very little time. Let me just remind you all, this meeting is on the record. It is being recorded and live streamed on the NATO website and its LinkedIn page. So remember that, this is not a Chatham House rule meeting. Please, when we get to the moments for Q&A, use the Q&A function. Do not use the raise hand or the chat functions, which are there. I'll be asking the questions in the little window we have on that point of view. And if you're watching on live stream, please use the Slido function. Go to Slido and enter the event code NATO 2030. This information hopefully will be supplied to you, but NATO 2030 is the event code on Slido if you want to submit a question to the NATO Secretary-General. And before we absolutely kick off here, because we're going to have quite a complex meeting with some remarks from the Secretary-General, we will have a little bit of time for Q&A. We're then going to get the NATO 2030 young leaders to submit some of their recommendations and share them with the Secretary-General, get a little bit of feedback before we go to a hackathon, which is a policy hackathon. It's going to run for 2 hours from 4:15 p.m. GMT through to 6:15 GMT. The culmination of 1 week involving students from 10 universities all coming up with their exciting ideas for a sort of pitch for purpose for the future of NATO through 2030. Ahead of all of that big program, I'm hoping that by this time we're going to be able to know where you are coming from, and that those of you who are joining us on the live stream are going to be able to show us a little bit and put it up maybe on the highlight screen, as I can see it's coming up here, where most of you are from. Let's have a look. Now, I'm assuming there's a big chunk from Belgium here, although I see the numbers changing as we look, probably because there's quite a few NATO folks listening in on this as well. I'm not sure it's entirely Belgian citizens, but we can see, as one would perhaps expect, also some heavy focus from Lithuania, that Baltic space. In any case, I'm not going to interpret it too much. Glad to see the US and the UK well represented, and Germany as well. So you can see we've got a really diverse group of countries represented at this meeting. What I'm going to do, as I said now, is invite in NATO Secretary-General to share some opening remarks. I will simply say this is his first major policy speech of 2021. And from a Chatham House perspective, let me say, Secretary-General, we're thrilled that you would be giving it here with us in collaboration with Chatham House, not least because this is our first major policy speech, international policy speech of our second century, which started in January 2021. So I think the timing, Secretary-General, is fantastic. I think you all know Secretary-General was appointed back in 2014. He is now into his second term, which will run through to 2022. He's really I think it is widely recognized, a deep transformation of the NATO alliance at a time of changing threats, changing actors, changing challenges, has brought his experience as former Prime Minister of Norway, Finance Minister, and former UN Special Envoy on climate change, somebody who understands, I think, the diversity of risks facing this world, joining us now. So Secretary-General, fantastic to have you with us. Thank you for joining this great audience. Look forward to your remarks, and then I'm going to engage you with your young panel of young NATO 2030 leaders. Over to you first.
Thank you so much, Robin. It's great to see you again. And good morning, North America, and good afternoon, Europe. Welcome, everyone. Let me start by thanking Chatham House. For over 100 years, your intellectual leadership has helped to guide governments, societies, and leaders through constant global change. So you are therefore the ideal partner for today's event. Like many of you here today, I became interested in politics at an early age because I wanted to work for a better and safer world. I grew up during the Cold War, always aware of the risk of a nuclear conflict. So I protested against nuclear weapons and celebrated the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War. For so many centuries, conflict was a constant companion in Europe. But since the creation of NATO, more than 70 years ago, peace has been preserved and freedom maintained. The nations of Europe and North America have stood together, pledged to defend each other, to protect our peoples, and to uphold our values. That pledge remains, but the world has changed, and it has become much more unpredictable than when I was growing up. We don't just face one clear challenge, but multiple complex challenges. From pandemics to infodemics, from climate change to the disruptive technologies. And the lines between peace and war, civilian and military, state and non-state are increasingly blurred. To continue adapting our alliance to this unpredictability, we launched the NATO 2030 initiative. This is why we are all here today, and why I asked a group of 14 young leaders from across the alliance to advise me on NATO's future. In addition, students from 10 universities have been competing all week in NATO's first policy hackathon. And later, you will have the chance to vote for the most innovative ideas. Today's event is about generating fresh, new thinking about the future of NATO. We have asked you to look at 5 areas that are vital to our security. First, we asked you to look at how we can continue to protect our values and the rules-based order that has brought us peace and prosperity for so many decades. These values, freedom, democracy, the rule of law, are not abstract notions. They are at the very core of who we are. And we got a shocking reminder of this as we watched the attack on the United States Congress just a month ago. That was not only an assault on the heart of American democracy, but also on the core values of NATO. President Biden's inauguration on those same steps, just 2 weeks later, showed the strength of democracy. It also showed that we must never take our democracy for granted. The second area we asked you to look at is resilience. Increasingly, our security does not just rely on strong militaries. We need strong, resilient societies and economies too. We need more robust infrastructure, transport and telecommunications, including 5G and undersea cables. And we need safer and more diverse supply lines for fuel, food and medical supplies. We must do more to identify vulnerabilities and mitigate risks and hold each other to account. For example, by screening foreign investment, ownership and control of our critical infrastructure and assets. Because these are not just economic decisions. They are crucial for our ability to protect ourselves. We should never trade short-term economic benefit for our long-term security interest. The third area we asked you to look at was NATO's role in the world. NATO is and will remain a regional alliance of Europe and North America. But the challenges we face are more and more global. So we need a global outlook. We need to work even more closely with like-minded partners across the globe. to develop a community of democracies, like Australia, Japan, New Zealand and South Korea. And also to reach out to potential new partners, like Brazil and India. To contribute to global peace and security, NATO must continue to work with partner nations to protect civilians in war zones and counter-terrorist operations. NATO is a standard setter in these areas, because for NATO, national security and human security must always go hand in hand. Fourth, we asked you to look at the security implications of climate change. Global warming puts pressure on people and resources and makes the world a more dangerous place. Climate change affects our security and makes it harder for our military forces to keep us safe. Therefore, we all have a responsibility to do more to combat climate change, which is why we are looking at how NATO can play our part in reaching net zero. Finally, we asked you to look at emerging and disruptive technologies. For decades, our technological edge has kept our military strong. But today, it is being challenged by countries like Russia and China. So we must continue to innovate and invest in the right forces with the right capabilities to remain competitive in a more competitive world. For all 5 areas, the ideas you put forward today will help me finalize my recommendations to NATO leaders at our summit later this year. Your generation has the greatest stake in our future, so it is essential that your voices are heard. This is your chance to shape our agenda for NATO 2030. So I thank you for your energy, your ideas and your optimism today. We must be bold. Together we can make NATO stronger. To keep our nation safe on both sides of the Atlantic, in a fast-changing world. I very much look forward to hearing from you, and I wish all the hackathon teams the very best of luck.
Thank you very much, Secretary-General. Thanks for those very important remarks, for laying out the scope of the challenge that you set to the NATO young leaders to look at the diversity of the challenges and risks, which, as you described, cover a spectrum that no longer has some of perhaps the simplicity of the Cold War challenges that faced NATO in that time. We want to draw in some questions right now, and we've got about 15 minutes to be able to get some questions over to you and points back. What I wanted to do, though, if I may, is start with a question on behalf of one of the young members of the Common Futures Conversation, a network actually which Chatham House has helped convene with the support of the Robert Bosch Foundation and a number of other organizations that brings young Europeans and young Africans together to think about their common future. And Olelekan Ojumu from Nigeria wanted me to pose the following question to you. So if I could kick off with this one, and his question goes as follows. Africa has a security challenge which needs both internal and external support. NATO has already established a working relationship with the African Union. What role will NATO play in curbing the insecurity that has been plaguing the continent beyond 2021? Could you share any thoughts on that specific question first, please, sir?
For NATO, it is extremely important to work with partners in our neighborhood. And Africa is a neighbor of the North Atlantic region where NATO operates. NATO is and will remain a regional alliance for North America and Europe. But of course, what happens in Africa matters for our security. So therefore, we strongly believe in the importance of working with partners, countries, but also organizations like the African Union. And as you just alluded to, NATO has already established a cooperation with the African Union. We also work with the UN. So we help, for instance, with training of peacekeeping forces, capacity building, how to deal with things like improvised explosive devices, how to protect peacekeeping troops in their missions and operations, including in Africa. Then we also have some partner nations through something we call the Mediterranean Dialogue. We work with countries like Tunisia, Morocco, other partners in Northern Africa. I also recently met the president of Mauritania. We are, of course, concerned about the situation in the Sahel region. And NATO allies are helping, supporting to fight international terrorism, different terrorist groups in the region. And we in NATO are also looking into how we can step up and do more, both when it comes to exercises, capacity building, and training. So in NATO, we often say that when our neighbors are stable, we are more secure. So I think it is extremely important that we work with Africa, with the African Union, with countries in Africa, and in particular our partners, to support, to help the efforts to fight instability and to fight international terrorism, and work in other ways with African countries.
Thank you very much. And I think with your commentary about the cascading effects of climate insecurity, we could easily see the relationship with African countries and that focus growing. I'm just going to turn to a couple of questions that I see here. We've got a huge amount coming in already, as we might imagine, into our Q&A. But Andrei Podradza, if I can stick with the sort of international NATO part of your remarks that you gave here, NATO in the world, your third topic. He says here, which NATO model are we heading towards? Given the strategic rivalry between the US and China, will NATO be more of a global alliance, or will collective defense against threats, example from Russia, continue to be central? We know certainly during the Trump administration, Secretary-General, there quite a bit of emphasis about turning towards the risks from China, which I think you did allude to in your remarks. But do you see, as he asked this question, is there going to be a new model where NATO becomes part of that US-China rivalry?
We don't regard China as an adversary, and there are opportunities connected to the rise of China. The strong economic growth has helped to lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and of course the strong economic growth in China over decades have also been important for NATO allies, important for our export markets, our economies. Having said that, at the same time, there are some challenges for our security. Soon, China will have the biggest economy in the world. China is an authoritarian society which does not share our values. We see that in the way they crack down on democracy, human rights activists in Hong Kong, how they deal with minorities or oppress minorities in their own country, like the Uyghurs, and also the way they have threatened Taiwan, or the way they actually behave, for instance, in the South China Sea. China is also now investing heavily in new modern military capabilities, including new nuclear capabilities. And China is present in NATO countries, investing heavily in infrastructure. We had an important discussion about 5G, and I think we have seen a convergence of views within NATO, realizing that, for instance, 5G network is crucial not only for our economies, but also for the resilience of our societies, and fundamentally about the security of our societies. And NATO is a unique platform to bring together North America and Europe to address these challenges, because in security, size matters. Of course, NATO is important for Europe, but NATO is also important for America, and especially addressing the security consequences of the rise of China. It matters for the United States that they have 29 friends and allies in NATO. Let me just end by saying that, for me, this is not about making NATO a global alliance. NATO will remain an alliance with members from Europe and North America, and our collective security guarantees, they apply for North America and Europe. But the threats we face in this region, they are becoming more and more global. Terrorism, cyber, space, and the rise of China, these are global challenges that affect our regional security. Therefore, being a regional alliance, we need a global approach, and this is also what we address in NATO 2030.
Well, thank you for that important distinction. As you said, a North Atlantic alliance in terms of collective security guarantees, but an alliance that has global interests. There are a number of questions. I'm sort of going to grouping them together, but Gigi Alsabrook in particular, along with others, asking about the dilemma I'm sure you're having to deal with two key members, Greece and Turkey, facing quite a serious set of disputes and disagreements, including deployment of vessels and so on in the Eastern Mediterranean. How are you as the Secretary-General managing this challenge? And how do you see the way forward, to put it bluntly, given both countries' central role for a strong NATO in the future?
It is well known, and it's actually part of what we have also addressed in NATO at several occasions, that there are differences between NATO allies, and in this case between two important NATO allies, Greece and Turkey. Both Greece and Turkey are valued allies, but they disagree on some issues, including related to the Eastern Mediterranean. I think that NATO's role is to provide a platform to address these differences. When we disagree, when there are differences, we need to convene and to sit down and to have open and honest discussions about the differences. And that's exactly what we have done when it comes to, for instance, the situation in the Eastern Mediterranean. And therefore, we have been able to establish at NATO what we call a deconfliction mechanism, and that's actually military lines of communications, a hotline, military technical talks between the Greek and the Turkish military and personnel here at NATO in Brussels, and by that reducing the risks of incidents, accidents between ships, planes in the Eastern Med coming from Turkey and Greece. This is important because in the 1990s, where we had similar differences, tensions between Greece and Turkey, we actually saw that led to casualties, to serious incidents that led to actually fatalities and loss of personnel. We need to prevent that from happening again, and that's the reason why we have established this deconfliction mechanism at NATO. This has also helped to pave the way for Greece and Turkey to sit down and restart what they call exploratory talks on the underlying disagreements. So yes, there are concerns, but I think the most important thing NATO can do is to try to find ways to step by step not only complain about the concerns and express concerns, but also find a positive approach, a way forward. And over the last weeks and months, we have seen some important steps in the right direction, proving that NATO has an important role to play also when allies disagree, as they do, for instance, in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Thank you. We have quite a few questions coming in on the cyber question as well. I'm just looking here. Obviously, you highlighted this as, I think, your fifth or one of your key topics in your list for the young group to focus on. And I can see John Paul Rosario has asked a question about whether NATO, having created its cyberspace operations center in Belgium, there's the big discussion about broadening the Article 5 commitment to include significant cyber attacks. And he asks, what do you consider a significant cyber attack? I think there are a couple other questions about cybersecurity, but let's focus on that one first, if we could. How are you going to be able to keep that predictability, the deterrent effect of NATO alive in this cyber era in particular?
So we will never give a potential adversary or enemy the privilege of telling them exactly when we're going to trigger Article 5. That's for us to decide based on a concrete assessment of a concrete situation. But what we have clearly stated is that a cyber attack might trigger Article 5. So if we assess it, deem it as serious enough, then we can trigger Article 5. Meaning that then we have all NATO allies stepping up and protecting the ally or those allies that are under a cyber attack. We can respond in cyber, but we can also respond in other domains. That's up to us to decide. The whole purpose of deterrence is to prevent an attack. And the success of NATO has been that we have been able to prevent conflict. The purpose of NATO is not to fight the war. The purpose of NATO is to prevent the war. And we have done so successfully for decades. Then I think we have to recognize that in cyber, the line between peace and war is more blurred. And that's one of the challenges we face, that before it was easy to define whether we were at war or whether we was living in peace. Now that with terrorism, cyber, hybrid threats, that line is more blurred, and that in itself is a challenge. We have established cyber as an operational domain, and we have also developed what we call national cyber effects, sometimes also referred to as offensive cyber. And NATO allies use that in a very effective way. For instance, in combating Daesh, ISIS in Iraq and Syria, we were able to take down many of their cyber capabilities that were important for them, recruiting, spreading their propaganda, financing. So offensive cyber or national cyber effects are also part of what NATO has developed over the last years, and we continue to strengthen our cyber defenses.
Thank you. A couple of, we've got another 4 minutes between the two of us, Secretary-General, just so you know where we are in the flow. And thank you everyone for all the questions. I don't know how many more we'll be able to take, but I've got a few left here. I want to make sure we touch on, maybe a little bit traditional, but Anastasia asks the very obvious question, what mechanisms do you foresee NATO developing in its 2030 agenda to contain continued Russian aggression? Full stop.
Credible deterrence, and that's exactly what we have done for more than 70 years, and we will continue to do and we have done that over the last years also by significantly strengthening our collective defense, the biggest reinforcement of our collective defense since the end of the Cold War, with the deployment of combat-ready battle groups to the eastern part of the alliance in the Baltic countries and Poland, with increased readiness of our forces, with a new command structure, and of course with the fact that all NATO allies, after cutting defense spending for many years, all NATO allies have since 2014 increased defense spending. So the adaptation of NATO, the fact that we are modernizing our military capabilities, that's the best way to make sure that no ally is suffering any attack from any direction, including of course also from Russia.
Two more questions. Paul Newman asks, again, a very big and important question. How do you see the arrival of the Biden administration affecting the future of NATO and the kind of plans that you're developing? Do you see some fundamental change?
I welcome the new Biden administration. I'm looking forward to working with President Biden and his security team. I have spoken with President Biden twice since the elections, and he has expressed strongly his personal commitment to NATO. I have worked with him in his previous capacities, and I know that President Biden is a strong personal supporter of the transatlantic bond, and he knows NATO very well. I also spoken with Secretary Blinken and the new Defense Secretary and Austin, and they also express their strong personal commitment. So I think that the new Biden administration provides a unique opportunity to re-energize, to revitalize, to rebuild NATO, and I look forward to welcoming President Biden to the NATO summit here in Brussels later this year.
And maybe one last question, I think, if this is what we've got time for now. Daphne Yalug has asked a question about environmental threats. In fact, there's a couple of questions about environmental issues here. For environmental threats, is NATO going to have to rethink its value structure? and its habits and its customs? And can NATO play a role in that redefinition of what security is? Tanji Morgan asks a similar question. Climate change is not just a climate threat, it is driven and is affecting biodiversity in particular, and that also has security implications. So how inventive can NATO be in rethinking these environmental dimensions of future security? How much of a role can NATO play in that space?
So climate change is a serious issue for many reasons. One of them is that climate change affects our security. Climate change is a crisis multiplier, and therefore it matters for NATO, and therefore NATO has to address the security consequences of climate change. One of the reasons I want to, as part of NATO 2030, to launch a process where NATO is adapting, developing a new strategic concept, is that actually in the existing strategic concept we agreed back in 2010, climate change is hardly mentioned. It's mentioned one word, tiny reference to climate change. I think that in the new strategic concept for NATO, which we hopefully then will start to develop when we meet at the NATO leaders meeting later this year, climate change has to play a much more prominent and important role. NATO should do its part, partly to look into how we can reduce emissions from military operations. We know that heavy battle tanks or fighter jets and naval ships, they consume a lot of fossil fuel and emit greenhouse or CO2, greenhouse gases, CO2. And therefore we have to look into how we can reduce those emissions by alternative fuels, solar panels, other ways of running our emissions. That will be good for the climate, reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases, but it will also increase the resilience of our troops and military operations. Because you know that one of the vulnerabilities in any military operation is the supply of fossil fuels. Long supply lines, vulnerable supply lines, has always through decades been a critical vulnerability for many different military operations. So if we can make us less dependent on that, we are both reducing emissions, but at the same time increasing the military effectiveness, the resilience of our troops. So we are working on that with different projects to look into how we can make our militaries greener and less dependent on fossil fuels. So we will address climate change. We are in the process of stepping up in that area, and for me it is a privilege to have my background as UN envoy on climate change and then bring that background into my current responsibility as Secretary-General of NATO.
Thank you very much for those answers, and actually in particular the one you made at the end there about actually potentially being more resilient as an alliance by actually addressing the climate challenge, because otherwise we're going to be facing enemies who may be ignoring these issues. Look, we're going to move now to engage the voices of the NATO young leaders. First, let's get a quick video up so we can introduce the whole process that you launched, Secretary-General, as part of your NATO 2030 vision. Please, let's run the video and then we'll engage in conversation. Video first.
I would like to hear your views, to have your ideas, your proposals of how NATO can remain strong.
Adis Biangaran, French.
My name is Don Cedar and I have a Dutch nationality.
My name is Martin Dimitrov. I come from Bulgaria.
My name is Corey Flesser. I am from the United States.
My name is Andrea Rafael Rodriguez. I'm from Spain.
I'm Anne-Marie Maffedon and I'm British.
Hi, my name is Gude Jensen and I am from Kiel, northern Germany.
My name is Katerina Kurtisova and I'm from Slovakia.
My name is Tanja Lacic and I'm a Romanian living in Belgium.
My name is Jan Lukacic. I'm a European coming from Czech Republic.
My name is Claudia Manejan and I'm from Italy.
My name is Mark Steinberg. I'm Latvian.
Hi guys, my name is Ulrich. I'm a Danish national living in Copenhagen.
My name is Ken Long and I'm a proud 31-year-old Canadian.
I assume we have introduced all of the NATO young leaders there, in which case I'm going to come back in and engage now in the next part of our conversation. And I noticed that the NATO Secretary-General was wearing a tie during that little video, but he has definitely got in with the space of our NATO young leaders now in this part of the conversation. So what I'm going to do is introduce, first of all, Alice Billon-Galland, who conveniently, from my point of view, is a research associate at Chatham House in our Europe program. She is one of the 14 NATO 2030 young leaders, as you saw introduced just there. In her case, she was nominated by the European Leadership Network, and Alice is going to kick off and at least kick off this process and introduce the first of our 6 speakers who will be engaging in conversation. Alice, over to you.
Thank you, Robin. And on behalf of the group, thanks to you, Secretary-General, for asking us to fit into your thinking for NATO 2030. I think it's fair to say that faced with the multiple and complex challenges which you just outlined in your speech, defending the 1 billion citizens who live in NATO countries is a moving target. This is why we believe that NATO will need to deter, defend, and provide security differently by 2030. Of course, NATO should firmly guard its strength with an enduring focus on deterrence and keeping the alliance militarily strong, as well as a renewed commitment to allied solidarity and democratic principles. But to meet all the new challenges, NATO will also need to embrace the change by combining a more holistic understanding of security with a more balanced transatlantic core and a truly global mindset. As you'll see, our report is made of both moonshot ideas and specific recommendations. The report doesn't aim to be a comprehensive strategy. Instead, we decided to focus on a couple of key issues which we believe should figure more prominently in NATO's work because they matter to the new security environment. So while being cautious to neither overextend NATO's mandate nor to over-securitize new policy areas, we argue that the alliance can bring considerable added value by doing 3 things. First, by providing a space for political consultations among allies and with like-minded partners on issues ranging from economic coercion to cyber attribution. Second, by providing leadership on global issues such as climate security and space governance. And finally, by fostering a new mindset on crucial topics such as resilience or emerging technologies. My colleagues will now present to you some of our key recommendations. Let me first introduce Tanja Lacic, nominated by CEPA, the Center for European Policy Analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Secretary-General. For us, resilience lies really at the heart of NATO's ability to defend and to deter in 2030. So let me share with you 2 key recommendations. First, we think NATO should become a resilience pathfinder. What does that mean? Well, it means that NATO has a greater role to play in helping allies achieve resilience across the board. Now, resilience is a moving target, but we bring concrete ideas like a resilience barometer or a civil military strategy that can help NATO craft a security insurance policy for the crises of the 2030s. Now, for us, resilience is split across 8 key domains. They range from the internal to the economic and from the defense to outer space. Now, second, we recommend a reform of the 2% defense spending target. We believe that what counts as a defense contribution in 2030 should be reimagined. We believe there's no better way to incentivize allies to spend on areas such as climate security, anti-hybrid warfare, or economic resilience than making it count as a contribution to our common defense. We believe that as NATO becomes a resilience pathfinder, it should also find the path towards responsibility rather than burden sharing. So any new metric should be inclusive of diverse contributions that strengthen our collective defense and our collective resilience. Thank you.
Secretary General, you heard those remarks from Tanya and also from Alice. Do you have a question back in return to them or a comment you'd like to make? Over to you, sir.
Yes, first of all, I would like to thank Alice for the report you and your group have written, because that's a very concise and concrete report, and you can be extremely proud of that input. And this is really an important input for me. As I prepare my recommendations, my proposals for the heads of state and government when they meet, and then for them to make final decisions on how NATO can adapt, change, so we are as successful in the future as we have been since our foundation more than 70 years ago. So many thanks. Then to Tanya, I will say that resilience has been, I think, underestimated for many years, because the focus has been on military strength, and of course military strength is important. We need modern military capabilities, but unless we have strong societies, we will not be able to have strong defense forces. And therefore everything related to resilience has become much more important for NATO allies. And I like the idea you have about NATO as a resilience pathfinder, and how we need to constantly develop is a moving target, develop the aims and the goals and the guidelines we set for resilience. Resilience that's about infrastructure, but also about economic considerations and economic resilience. And my question is actually about what do you think NATO should do when it comes to allied economic resilience, in addition to what national governments and other international organizations are doing in that area?
Tanya, that's a question back to you.
Yes, thank you, Secretary General, for this question. This is really one of the absolute key aspects that we have to figure out by 2030. The first commandment of resilience is that you're as strong as your weakest link. Now, today in our hyper-globalized economy, weaponized economic power can be as damaging as traditional military power. For example, if we think of supply chains that feed into both civil and military technology, if these are disrupted, this is not going to only cause commercial losses, but can actually compromise NATO's defense posture. So these are risks that unfold at the nexus between security, economy, and technology. And we need to better understand them and address them in a holistic manner if we want to aim for economic resilience. Now, for this, our group recommends equipping NATO with geo-economic tools. Now, the first step is to put geoeconomics and economic resilience firmly back on the agenda of NATO by resurrecting the Economic Committee. Now, this committee can help bring the right expertise within NATO and can help it coordinate with other geoeconomic relevant organizations such as the European Union. The second step would be taking interoperability, which is the concept at the core of how NATO functions, and extending it to economic resilience. By doing this, NATO could become a hub where allies could coordinate on export control regimes or on setting up robust yet aligned foreign investment screening mechanisms. What is clear is that economic coercion is a threat that NATO cannot ignore. The key does lie in allied hands, but NATO can help point them at the right door. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Tanya. I notice I will do some Robin Niblett editorializing. I also found your second recommendation on rethinking the 2% target a very interesting provocation, which I'm sure the Secretary General and all of NATO will be considering very carefully. But I think the focus right now on resilience obviously has been essential. We have two more blocks of recommendations and interaction with Secretary General. Keeping an eye on time, we're only running about 3 minutes behind, but just to remind you, the time is very tight. I'm going to give the floor now to two more of the 7 members of the NATO team, Young Leaders team, who are presenting here. This is to Ulrik Smed, who is with the Office of the Tech Ambassador of the Danish Foreign Ministry, who's been nominated by the Atlantic Council, and Katerina Ketisova, who is actually a fellow with the European Leadership Network and has been nominated by GlobSec. So Ulrik, do you want to start off first, and then to Katerina with your set of recommendations?
Thank you, Robin, and thank you, Secretary-General, for allowing us to be here today. I'd like to highlight some of our group's thinking on values and why this is important for NATO, especially following the events in recent years and months. So at home, we believe allies should recommit to NATO's democratic values at the upcoming summit this year, to the rule of law, transparency, and division of powers. And operationally, we recommend leaders to have an annual discussion on democratic principles and work towards a written values pledge that would outline norms and responsibilities that allies strive to live by, to focus NATO's purpose and its commitments in the years to come. Because we need to be ready and credible in the eyes of citizens and for an era of geopolitical competition on values. Abroad, we think the alliance should become a beacon for democracy. To work together with democracies around the world, NATO's partnerships should be anchored in value-based principles on all levels: political, capacity building, and operational engagements. A decade ago, we might have taken for granted that our values and the direction of travel, but we can't afford to do that any longer. We need to lean in. And that's why NATO needs a global partnership for peace with an open horizon to the world and an active approach to partnerships with democratic nations, also outside the North Atlantic region. So in 2030, we would like to see NATO lead by example at home and abroad in a transparent and accountable way, while building the democratic foundations for an era of global competition on values. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ulrik. And let me just say, there was a very, I thought, important question we did not get to in the discussion earlier from Rachel Smith, who talked about precisely what you raised, the issue of values and whether the alliance can remain as committed and how it could do it. So thank you very much for those comments, Ulrik. Incredibly important. Katerina, you've got the very big issue now of climate. Over to you.
Thank you, Robin, and thank you, Secretary-General. As we speak, climate change is affecting our security environment. NATO can and should do more to climate-proof its policies and operations. I'd like to offer 3 recommendations from our climate chapter. First, we believe that NATO should capitalize on the current political momentum and put climate change at the top of the political agenda, starting with the next NATO summit. On that occasions, the allies should publicly state that climate change is an existential threat and a fundamental security risk to the alliance. At the North Atlantic Council, an informal caucus of allies that are already actively engaged in addressing climate security risks could be established to facilitate the exchange of lessons learned and best practices, and to regularly brief the NAC. And ultimately, to echo what the Secretary-General has already stated, climate change should be embedded in an updated strategic concept. Second, NATO needs to better understand the conflict and instability implications of climate change. Partnerships at all levels, military cooperation programs, and diplomatic tools are very important for NATO to understand the underlying dynamics on the ground and to be prepared to respond in time. A combination of remote sensing, big data, and AI, while improving intelligence sharing among allies, would increase NATO's capacity to better forecast future environmental shocks. And lastly, NATO should lead by example and act as a catalyzer for climate action by supporting allies in their emissions reduction and adaptation efforts. Thank you.
Secretary-General, some questions or comments back to Ulrik and Katerina.
So first to Ulrik, I very much agree that values is what NATO is actually founded on. So we need to stand up for those values. And NATO has, of course, partly been important in defending those values by defending those values against authoritarian threats and challenges from the outside, especially during the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Then after the Cold War, NATO played a key role in spreading those values through the enlargement. We have gone from 12 members to now 30 members, and just by that we have helped to spread democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty throughout Europe. But then thirdly, we need to be honest and also talk about the concerns that some allies express about our own ability to live up to our own values. And there I think that the most important thing NATO can do is that we are open, we are frank, we provide a platform also for allies to express their concerns and to look into how we can make sure that we defend and protect the values also internally. I refer to the attack on the US Capitol or the US Congress building as one example of how we can never take these values for granted, even inside our own countries. This is not the first time we see concerns expressed about values in our own countries, but I think that NATO's role is to address these concerns in an open and frank way, and I'm absolutely certain that will be also part of the NATO 2030 agenda. Then on climate change, I also already said some words about climate change. But again, I really hope, and I not only hope, but I know that climate change will be on the top of the NATO agenda. It will be an important issue when leaders meet and also as we start to develop a new strategic concept. But climate change is so important that it's not enough only to talk and write about it. We need to do something concrete to reduce emissions. And therefore, I also welcome your third element, that we need to actually help allies to reduce their own military emissions. And therefore, my question is that do you think that NATO allies should set voluntary targets for reducing their emissions from military activities, military emissions? And what more could we do to help to reduce emissions from military?
Katrina, I think that's for you.
Thank you for that question. I would say that before we speak about voluntary targets, the first step would be to help allies measure their military emissions. And once those are known and maybe made public, in the next step, NATO could help allies set voluntary targets so they can reduce their emissions in ways that do not compromise operational effectiveness. But there's more that NATO can do. Another step would be to set green targets for defense planning, and such targets could include a 25% fuel efficiency increase, higher standards for military facilities, or cleaner equipment and support solutions. And to revert back to our recommendation about a reformed 2% defense spending metric, we believe that the development of sustainable technologies, of green technology, should form part of that reformed metric.
Thank you very much for that reply, Katrina, and for keeping this conversation going. And we are moving again pretty well on time here, Secretary General. What we're going to do now is come to the last third block, and we're going to get some opening remarks from Corey Flesser, Women Peace Security Advisor at Booz Allen Hamilton, nominated by the German Marshall Fund of the US, GMF. We're going to hear from Jan Lukaczewicz, Research Assistant at the Czech Academy of Sciences, who was nominated by the Aspen Institute Europe. And we'll be hearing from Andrea Garcia Rodriguez, who's a research fellow at the Barcelona Center for National Affairs, CIDOB, nominated by Cybersec. Corey, can you kick off this section first, please, with your comments about partnerships and cooperation? Over to you.
Thank you, Robin. Secretary-General, I'll highlight two recommendations on partnerships. Our first recommendation aims to enhance cooperation between NATO and the European Union. The group acknowledges a deeper NATO-EU partnership would further cement the existing bonds within the Euro-Atlantic community and benefit both common members as well as single membership nations of both organizations. To streamline and elevate cooperation, the group recommends appointing a NATO special representative for NATO-EU relations. This special representative would be responsible for strengthening existing recognized areas of cooperation, as well as identifying new or underexplored areas. This could include emerging technologies, space governance, and climate security. Our second recommendation focuses on allied cohesion, unity, and coherence in NATO's engagement with partners in the Indo-Pacific. Our report highlights the increasing geopolitical importance of the Indo-Pacific region and the need to enhance allies' collective understanding of China's regional activities and global influence. The group recommends establishing an alliance-wide approach to Indo-Pacific partnerships with a focus on political and practical cooperation with like-minded nations and multilateral organizations. NATO should engage in structured political consultations with key Indo-Pacific partners on topics that reflect shared areas of interest, such as economic security, freedom of navigation, and resilience. Such strategic engagement would help the alliance achieve a more uniform understanding of the challenges posed by China and expand NATO's global network of democratic, values-based partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. Let me turn straight now to Jan Lukaczewicz for his comments on emerging and disruptive technologies. Jan.
Thank you. Dear Secretary-General, to keep the technological edge, NATO needs to change its mindset. In a rapidly evolving environment of emerging technologies, such as space technologies or biotech, NATO needs to take a proactive approach in their development and adoption. I'd like to highlight 3 recommendations here. Our first recommendation is to NATO to go digital. NATO should put more effort to fully digitize Euro-Atlantic political and military institutions. Efficient gathering and processing information from allied countries can greatly enhance the speed of our decision-making. Digitization enables the use of AI, machine learning, and quantum capabilities. These are also in a focal point of NATO innovation. Second, NATO should strive to identify new technologies early on, strive to accelerate their development and adopt them across the whole alliance. We propose the creation of a new agency focusing on emerging and disruptive technologies. We call it NATO Strive. In short, this ecosystem will encompass the early identification of emerging technologies and their further research and development. This will result in accelerated adoption and bridging the gap between the private sector, academia, and leadership of NATO allies. Our third recommendation suggests NATO being an ethical norm setter. A newly established ethical framework would enable NATO to set norms in the area of emerging technologies, allowing alliance to protect and uphold its values in future. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jan. Let me turn first to you, Secretary-General, to respond to those comments, any questions you might have back to the group, and we'll get Andrea to reply. Over to you, Secretary-General.
So first to Corey, I totally agree that partnerships are important for NATO. No single institution, no single country can manage all the security challenges we face alone. So we need to work together. Therefore, for instance, for NATO, it has been extremely important to strengthen the cooperation with the European Union. And I'm glad to see that we have been able to lift cooperation between NATO and the European Union to unprecedented levels. I meet regularly with the EU leadership, and we are constantly in dialogue with them about how we can further strengthen. Just the fact that more than 90% of the people in the EU live in a NATO country illustrates the importance of us working closely together. I also agree with you on the importance of trying to look into how we can further strengthen cooperation, partnership with our partners in the Indo-Pacific region. We have 4 partners there already in South Korea, Japan, New Zealand, and Australia. And I think also when we look at those partners, we see that these are countries which are also important when it comes to standing up for our democratic values. And they are eager to work more closely with NATO. We are eager to work more closely with them. And in the light of the rise of China, I think that the partnership in the Pacific region becomes even more important. And we need to also discuss, based on your recommendations, how we can further strengthen cooperation with like-minded democracies around the world. Then technology. I think it's hard in a way to understand how much new, disruptive, emerging technologies are changing the nature of warfare. I have read some books about the First World War, and people didn't realize the horrendous, the brutality of that war, because they hadn't really taken into account the consequences of the Industrial Revolution for war fighting. In one way, I think we risk doing the same mistake now, that artificial intelligence, facial recognition, autonomous weapon systems, quantum computing, all of that combined, it's not only changing our civilian societies, but it's also fundamentally changing the way conflicts will be fought in the future. And therefore, NATO needs, of course, to maintain the technological edge, but we also need to look into how can we develop arms control addressing new technologies. Arms control has traditionally been about counting warheads. Now it's about having regulations of cyber, of algorithms, of a lot of other areas where the normal counting of warheads doesn't work. So how do we apply arms control to disruptive emerging technologies? That's a big chapter. And also when it comes to ethical dimensions, and there I think also NATO should be, as you also allude to, a standard setter. And this is uncharted waters, and we should really have an open mind of how NATO can play a constructive role in addressing all these challenges related to technology. I have one question. Is that now, or should I wait?
You've got one more question coming to you from, or one more comment, maybe in reply from Andrea. Andrea, over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, for your comments. I agree with you, and the group agrees that certainly emerging and disruptive technologies is a very big topic, and the issue of partnerships is another big topic. And I would like to highlight two issues that you've mentioned in your comments. The first one is about arms control, and the second one is about ethics. We believe that by the creation of this new entity called NATO Strive, we could work towards these two issues. First of all, because if NATO guides globally the development of emerging and disruptive technologies, it can also guide the way they are developed. For that reason, we believe that the creation of an ethical framework that should guide this development of these new technologies should be a priority for the Alliance, because not only through this NATO Strive agency, NATO would be able to maintain its technological edge by seeking out and finding these technologies, as well as the companies and the startups and the ecosystem itself that have the potential to develop them, but also by exporting these ideas of these like ethical EDT, ethical emerging disruptive technologies to the world, and therefore reaffirming its power as an ethical norm setter and also as a democratic giant.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Secretary General, that brings us to the end of this section. I don't know if you wanted to make any last comment right now, otherwise I'm going to thank you and introduce the hackathon. But any last comment from you, sir?
I have one also comment on this issue of this new entity you have proposed, or both Andrea and Jan mentioned, that we need a new entity to deal with disruptive and emerging technologies. I think that's an interesting idea. It's not for me now to conclude. I will consult with allies, with capitals, with leaders before I put forward my proposals for them. But I think that's an interesting idea, because I think that we need to really look into how NATO can deliver when it comes to bringing allies together in addressing the importance of new disruptive emerging technologies. One challenge we have is that traditionally new technologies were very much developed by the military. Also everything from nuclear to the internet to GPS has been developed by government actors and often the military. Now very much of the technology is developed in the private sector. And of course, if we develop or establish a NATO entity for addressing emerging and disruptive technologies, then we also need to look into how can we link that entity with the private sector, including with startups. So that, if there is time, that's my last question, is actually the link between a NATO entity on technology and the crucial cooperation link with the private sector, including startups, which we know are so important for new technologies.
Thank you, Secretary-General. I'm glad you brought that point in right at the end, because actually that was another of the questions we were unable to get to, which was the connection with the private sector in one of the earlier points. So I'm glad you had an opportunity to plug it at the end. Let me say right now, having moderated quite a few meetings in my time as director of Chatham House, I thought that was one of the most content-rich, concentrated dialogues I've had the privilege of moderating and witnessing. Huge thanks to our young NATO 2030 young leaders who showed many of us who are less young how to be able to really put good ideas over in a thoughtful and organized way. Thank you, Secretary-General, for making the time, for inspiring and driving this process, and all of your teams as well back in at NATO. It really, I think, has been an incredibly productive moment. Now, this is not the end. I want to remind everyone, I said at the beginning, we're now going to be going into the policy hackathon. It will be starting at 1/4 the hour, I'll put it that way, depending on where you are. It is 6 past the hour right now, but at 1/4 the hour, we will be going into the hackathon. Those of you who've been watching this on live stream, stay with the same live stream. You will have an opportunity to continue engaging and offering questions through the Slido function that you've already done. Those of you who've been joining this session through Zoom, many of the Chatham House members and others who've been in through that platform, you've had in the chat line the link to follow to be able to now engage in the hackathon. It'll be, you need to follow the links that were provided there. And also there was a Slido link that you can use to be able to engage in the conversation as well. And this is going to go on for 2 hours. So GMT from 16:15 to 18:15, at the end of which we should have some fascinating insights voted on with a jury, which are the best ideas, as you always get with a hackathon, on how NATO will adapt for all the big questions that we discussed today, the values battle, the economic as well as security resilience, the climate challenge, the technology disruption challenge, the interoperability, and where NATO sits in the world. Again, let me just thank you, Secretary-General, for taking on so many of these ideas and engaging with these young NATO leaders. And again, I think on my behalf and everyone's here, great job to the 14 young leaders putting together these great ideas in such a concentrated way. So that's it from me. Look forward to seeing you in the hackathon. Go straight there, but it'll kick off at 1/4. Have a good, productive rest of your day. Thank you very much. Bye, Jens. Thank you, Secretary-General.
Thank you.
Games are just a fun way to waste time, right? Not necessarily. Playing games could lead to new ways to combat modern threats. That's what we're looking at today in NATO Science. Around the world, people spend billions of hours a week playing games. But what if, rather than playing games aimlessly, we could divert this time and effort into solving security problems? Our scientist in Ankara has more.
I always remember a military trainer telling me, I have students playing Fortnite and I'm trying to teach them using PowerPoint. We use games at NATO to play through different scenarios. In the future, threats could come from all sides. Disinformation, urban warfare, cyber attacks, civil unrest, robots, drones, even augmented humans. Using games helps us imagine these scenarios.
The game is on, but how does it work?
We give our teams a problem and assign them different roles. Red team are hostile forces, green are the legitimate government, blue is NATO, yellow might be other non-governmental factors like aid workers or displaced people. Imagine a megacity of 10 million people divided into zones based on ethnicity. A hostile country uses those divisions as an excuse to capture the city's port, which is a lifeline to the citizens. But the hostile country doesn't use regular troops. They use unmarked paramilitary forces. Whatever methods NATO might use to stabilize that crisis, cyber, information, or kinetic, will have consequences for the population. A facilitator watching the game runs up a software that uses an algorithm that predicts the effects of each action. A riot, 1 point up the crisis meter. An epidemic, another point. If the crisis meter runs too high, NATO loses. The game is designed not to be won, but rather to manage the crisis and restore stability, which is one of the NATO's core tasks. But the game isn't the interesting part. It is the people who are playing. Where the science comes in is that we observe cognitive reactions. Although NATO is a consensus-based organization, we want argument. It is what we call matrix gaming. NATO needs people asking questions they haven't asked before, because these might be the questions that we need to answer to keep peace and security in the future.
Next episode, we'll take you to Florence in Italy to meet a robot taking the lead in a fight against landmines. Check out the rest of the videos in the series to learn more about NATO science.
Seconds.
Well, good morning from North America, from Cambridge, Massachusetts, to this second part of today's NATO 2030 events. This is the friendly, competitive part of today's proceedings that are part of, as you have just heard from the Secretary-General and from Robin Niblett, the leader of Chatham House, a longer reflection project for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that is undergoing a deep transformation to put itself in the position to be the leading anticipatory security and defense organization for an interconnected century for the 21st century. I'm Catherine Kluver-Ashbrook. I'm the Executive Director of the Future of Diplomacy Project at the Harvard Kennedy School, and also the Executive Director of the Project on Europe and the Transatlantic Relationship. And it's been my pleasure to partner with Chatham House, who is hosting us this afternoon in Europe, this morning in North America, and of course, NATO itself as it undergoes these important exercises and has opened itself deliberately to the hearing and incorporating, working with the intergenerational aspects or the intergenerational viewpoints that not only NATO 2030 young leaders have been bringing to the table for the past year, but now even a younger generation of university students, some of them still in college, some of them not even members of NATO nations, but convinced that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in its transformative process has much to deliver to continue to ensure security, prosperity, and frankly, human advancement in the 21st century. So welcome to all of you. We have an exciting few hours of programming planned. We have universities from all over the NATO member countries participating, and they are truly as diverse as NATO themselves. So we want to give you an insight into what our students have been working on tirelessly for the past 5 days, fueled by adrenaline, coffee, and commitment to the good cause. So without further ado, let's tell you what this NATO hackathon was all about. Roll the tape.
Labas?
Hola. Ahoy.
Hi.
Welcome to NATO's first policy hackathon.
I think it's great that NATO is giving floor to young people because, the youth is the future. And, it's very important that the young people will perceive NATO as a strong and important alliance.
Can bring something new to the table, a fresh perspective, new ideas, and perhaps even a better way or a different way of doing things.
Well, that was an introduction to the diverse people you will hear from very shortly as part of the actual pitch competition, and to the issues that drive these young people. And we heard from the Secretary-General the key issues, the challenges in his own life growing up that brought him to the kind of political awakening and to the kind of degree of involvement that then he has capped with the leadership of this organization. And you will see undoubtedly in these young people the future not only of NATO, but in the way that we can steer, steward, and anticipate the challenges that lie ahead. So without further ado, let's meet the teams. Let's meet our competitors. Let's have the slide.
Hallo. Labas?
Hallo.
Bonjour.
defending the values-based international order and really showcasing how international collaboration is still possible.
So strengthening the alliance and making it so that we can all face any kind of challenges.
The political unity of all alliance. Digitization and gender perspectives, basically.
Make sure that there's political will and cohesion amongst the allies.
We should be in this conversation because we're going to have to pick up the torch pretty soon and actually manage what we're talking about.
So you see, not only are these young people willing and able to pick up the torch, but they're also willing to think through some of the most challenging problems that face not only NATO, but its member states and other associated democracies in the world. You will have already gotten a taste of the subjects that we're about to tackle, from increased digitization and the threat of cyber warfare to resilience around climate change, but then also creating truly inclusive security policy that maps along human needs, protects human interests, and protects the safety and integrity of those that are threatened by conflict, whether it arises from quote unquote natural causes like climate change, well, man-made natural causes, but nonetheless those causes, or by conflict and sort of traditional ways of facing off against one another as part of this geopolitical competition that through the 21st century has added a strong economic dimension. So as we have grown together in so many ways, and you'll see how much these teams have grown together in their own work on these issues, we've also grown apart. And so part of this competition anchors us again in common problem solving. So let's take a look at the university teams that we have with us. Then I'll introduce the jury members. And I want you to get ready to be an interactive part of this conversation. We'll have a number of questions to pose to you, and we want to have you be part of our judging. So let's meet the university teams. You just saw briefly the slide. We have from Portugal, the beautiful city of Porto, Universidade Portucalense, home to a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We have from my own part home country, the Freie Universität in Berlin, in Germany's capital city. From King's College London, in the pulsating heart of the capital of the United Kingdom, King's College, of course. Charles University, Prague, one of the oldest universities in the world, flying their flag for their team today. The Johns Hopkins University, yes, based in Baltimore, but always with a bridge into the heart of the American capital, Washington, DC. Sciences Po Paris, which has brought forth many a French prime minister and yes, leaders within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization as well. The gateway to the Arctic Circle in the Arctic University of Tromsø, Norway. So welcome to you. The University of Vilnius in Lithuania, often thought of as the Athens of the North. And then from all the way out west in Canada, Simon Fraser University. And of course, last but not least, my own alma mater and institution, Harvard University, with a joint Harvard College, Harvard Kennedy School team. So welcome to all of you. And let me introduce now our jury. We have the great fortune to have 3 permanent jury members who have overnight, similarly fueled by coffee, I am sure, reviewed the pitches that you will soon see that our teams have submitted. And then for each category, for each of our competitions, and I'll explain how the competition works in greater detail, we have guest judges. So let me introduce on your screen, Shashank Joshi, everybody who is a frequent reader of The Economist knows his sharp thinking and his equivalent sharp writing on defense policy. He is the defense editor of The Economist, also with a link to Harvard, where he was a Kennedy Scholar. Dr. Renata Dewan, who's the Deputy Director and Senior Executive Officer at Chatham House, who joined Chatham House after a very long career at the UN, actively engaged in peacekeeping and peace building. And last but not least, Dr. Tobias Leibrand, who heads lead the key leadership organization, leadership development organization based in Berlin. Those are our permanent judges who have reviewed all pitches. And I'll introduce our rotating judges from Chatham House and NATO itself per pitch as we get there. So let's talk a little bit about the competition, shall we? I know you are excited to get straight into it. We want you to be a part of this. You'll have a part at the end to help judge the pitches of the teams on the various topics. And we'll want to ask you questions as we move through this competition about NATO's role, about some of the key issues NATO will have to tackle in the future. And that we will do with, well, here's my little housekeeping note, through slido.com. So if you want to go ahead and pull that site up as you watch these pitches so that you are ready to engage in the polling and in the interactive questioning, please do so. Your password or your sort of gateway to this conversation is NATO 2030. So go ahead and type that in. That's our little housekeeping note. So the teams you're about to meet, the solutions you're about to hear are the work, as I said, of about 4 days, 4 nights, almost 5, of very intensive collaboration. It's fair to say that these people have lived and breathed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization for that last time. They were helped by and guided by members of the lead consultancy, and they all had some expert advice from NATO. They were free to seek outside counsel as they wanted, which some did, some didn't, and perhaps you'll see the results that led to that. We're going to go ahead and move in 5 segments. 2 teams each per segment will pitch. You'll see a video that each of the teams has put together. And then the team captains will be able to answer a number of live questions for the jury members, our standing jury members, and our guest jury members who are subject matter expertise. And so they'll get feedback. And then our standing jury has deliberated overnight, as I said. There will be some final jury deliberation over WhatsApp. Technology will help us here. And in that time will be the moment where you get to weigh in, either by participating in our polling or by asking questions of our team captain. So again, be at the ready to join that conversation. We will take a couple of minutes, 4 minutes roughly, for pitch number 1. We'll move on to the second pitch immediately. There'll be Q&A with the jury. And then the jury will judge and has judged on the following categories: teamwork, originality, feasibility, which is to say, can NATO implement this? Is this within NATO's remit? And should NATO, as the nodal organization of its member states, be doing this work? And then finally, presentation. There's a maximum score of 20 points per pitch, and each one of these segments will take head talk 18 minutes. So you know what that will feel and sound like. Moving on to the first round of pitches. The first round topic was people first, protecting populations in modern day conflict. And tackling these questions, or this key question, were 2 teams, a team from London's King's College and from rival institution, for the purposes of this exercise, Sciences Po in Paris. Our guest judges for this round will include Nicole El Kawaja, the project manager for Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House, and Romana Mikkelsen, who's a project coordinator for Women, Peace and Security at NATO. So here is your first pitch from King's College.
NATO faces new threats, from great powers to insurgents. In order to survive, it must continue to develop new capabilities, many of which have the potential to reshape the very character of war and peace. Dreadnoughts and machine guns have been replaced by drones and railguns. Technology is sprinting forward, and we don't know where its future is going. But we do know what it has left behind. The drafters of the Geneva Convention may not have imagined a world with drones, cyber warfare, and hypersonic missiles, but the core principles, distinction, proportionality, and precaution in attack, are timeless. So how can we reconcile technology and protection?
We propose a comprehensive framework that is simple, practical, and adaptable, that mainstreams protection of civilians into each step in the life cycle of new technology, from doctrine to deployment. Protecting civilians is a legal obligation and an ethical duty. It is also strategically vital. Engagement with civilians and civil society legitimizes NATO in operations around the world. Further, as NATO prepares for potential Article 5 engagements, mainstreaming these principles will be critical in ensuring the defense of its own citizens from new threats abroad. Our three-point model of analysis assesses military capabilities and considers norms, ethics, and justice, and both social and physical impact. How can we assess changing thresholds and ethical constraints on the use of force in light of new technology? How can NATO use transparency to build public trust? And finally, how can NATO ensure civilians' physical security? These three prompts can and should guide NATO's approach to capability development, spanning doctrine, development, and deployment. Doctrine dictates what capabilities member nations acquire. Changes here will guide the development of technologies designed to avoid, mitigate, and minimize civilian casualties. In 2016, NATO developed its first Protection of Civilians framework. To accelerate its implementation, especially in technology development, a POC mandate should be strengthened at strategic commands. This objective can be furthered by NATO efforts to collate alliance-wide best practice and coordination with civil society actors. NATO already adopts a whole life cycle approach to capability development and encourages nations to use the AAP-20 standardization document as a guide. This process can be used to mainstream civilian protection across the alliance. In particular, there are key points called decision gates in the whole life cycle where impact on civilians needs to be assessed before development is allowed to proceed. Positive interventions in doctrine and development can shape safe use, but the alliance can take further steps during operations to ensure civilians are protected. First, NATO must implement an alliance-wide standard for reporting civilian casualties. We cannot protect civilians with imperfect information. Second, all operational planning should include human security red teaming as part of the process. Last, protection of civilians should be included in all NATO exercises and built into the certification process appropriately. NATO has pledged to protect civilians. Our policy proposal provides a clear path to centering and fulfilling this pledge. This will help secure peace for the alliance and the world throughout this decade and beyond.
In the 21st century, the humanitarian idea of human security lies at the heart of NATO's ethical foundations. As a defensive alliance sworn to make the world a more peaceful place, NATO becomes responsible for protecting civilian populations everywhere. This includes the idea to identify, mitigate, and avoid threats to human dignity and human rights whenever possible. So in terms of human security, we should ask, where will people be in the future? And the answer is quite simple. They will be in large cities. In the upcoming century, urbanization will be the defining demographic change. By 2030, already 730 million people will live in megacities worldwide. With their increasing number and strategic importance, megacities will become a target in NATO's future defensive operations and out-of-area missions. However, past military operations in urban centers, such as Grozny or Raqqa, have spotted difficulties to distinguish civilians from enemy combatants, strategic targets from vital infrastructure, and to conduct military operations without causing human suffering. Therefore, we ask, how will NATO minimize the negative effects its operations have on urban civilian populations? And how will NATO incorporate technological advancements when conducting complex urban warfare?
We propose two solutions. Firstly, NATO should create a center of excellence for urban warfare to understand how urban operations can be conducted with lesser damage to human security. Within this new COE, experts from various disciplines, including urban experts, and from other COEs should come together to work with SHAPE and member states on guidelines for operations in urban areas. The COE will emphasize a human-centric use of technology to increase human security in urban warfare. This includes, for example, fit-for-theater armament and 3D visualization of megacities to understand their complex infrastructure. We advise NATO to establish a civil society inclusion mechanism to gather NGO and civil society input. Furthermore, a public awareness building body will engage with urban populations to identify best practices during an attack. To avoid duplication and to approach urban conflict in an interdisciplinary way and profit from field experience, we advise this new COE to draw on other COEs' expertise and tools, as well as military staff to integrate their practical insights. In conclusion, in the future, NATO should focus more on training its forces in urban scenarios instead of remote and unpopulated areas, as it is happening right now.
Secondly, NATO should incorporate this acquired knowledge into the strategic and operational command. We propose the establishment of a specific strategic body under NATO Allied Command Operations that focuses on the protection of civilians and human security. Also, we advise NATO to create an individual cultural intelligence unit at each operation. This unit aims to predict risks for human security by establishing a local network of human intelligence analysts and local informants in order to stay informed on regional developments. Additionally, NATO forces should provide drones or low Earth orbit satellites to easily provide aerial wireless networks and to ensure communication with the civilian population.
In conclusion, in the 21st century, the idea of human security lies at the heart of NATO's ethical foundations. NATO needs to minimize the negative effects its operations have on urban populations. NATO should acknowledge that fast-moving, hyper-complex urban scenarios will increasingly arise as probable theaters of operations. With these solutions approaches, we do not only envisage NATO in 2030, but aim to prevent the catastrophic humanitarian consequences when NATO finds itself operating in an environment it is unprepared for. Thank you.
All right, a hearty thanks to Team Policy Kings from King College London and the very aptly and originally named Operation Resolute Baguette from Sciences Po. I must say I'm very happy to not have to be judging either of these entries. The framework for rethinking every operation that NATO does with the civilian and human angle, as we heard from the Policy Kings, and how NATO needs to rethink its interventions in a truly urban century, as we heard from the team at Sciences Po. Other people have to do that, and the person who speaks, having seen these two pitches, is Dr. Renata Dewan. So Renata, your impressions of these two pitches.
Well, super pitches, really, really super pitches, and got us off to a great start. What I loved about both of your pitches was the emphasis you put on the self-interest for NATO of protection of civilians. It's not just about altruism and about maintaining international law. And thanks, I liked the way King's College team brought in the reference to the Geneva Conventions, but it's really about protecting NATO populations and advancing NATO's own goals, as I think we heard from Sciences Po, and I really liked Sciences Po's references to human dignity as well as human rights. So that was great. Maybe just to hone in on 2 points, I think, from King's College. I liked very much your emphasis on the comprehensive steps. You listed a whole set of activities, including engagement with civil society, and I think that is a real area for work for NATO going forward. So that was great. Maybe one aspect that I would have liked to have seen a bit more on is you started up very intriguingly with tech and protection of civilians. And I would have loved to have seen you play that out. Both what does new technology mean for protection of civilians? Is it an increase of lethality? But it's also different tools of warfare that sometimes may be less about lethality, but more about disruption, distrust, misinformation. So how we think about protection of civilians in that much more complex environment, I think is worth a look. On Sciences Po, in a way, I almost felt it was the other way around, that you felt, I loved your urban focus and I loved your very practical focus on a center of excellence. Also, you had that comprehensive approach, but you were almost a true believer in tech, to the point that perhaps we want to think about some of the risks of technology for protection of civilians. And for example, your use of drones, and that drones can help mitigate civilian threats. It's very much true, but it's also perhaps been a challenge, as we've seen in Afghanistan and Pakistan, of undermining trust in communities and risks that have imperiled humanitarian operations. So I think a little bit more nuance from you both as we think about the pros and the cons of technology for protection of civilians would be great. And a final point, very interesting, you both focused very much on physical protection, but I think some of the challenges for our future will also be the protective environment, and that's it is on how we think about disruption, misinformation, and the broader environment in which civilians work and live and thrive. But fabulous presentations, and congratulations, both of you.
Thank you, Renata, for that nuanced view, and of course, a point to the architecture of data and digital systems, who builds them, who owns the data, who knows who surveys specific conflict areas. Can NATO own that itself? Does it have the technological competence to bring that knowledge in? And does it have the people to do that work? Or how will it find the people who can do that work in the future? Lots of additional questions to answer. Surely the work that many of these students will do as they enter their professional worlds. We have a couple of questions to our team captains from our rotating judges, but I want to encourage all of you watching to begin to put your questions into the slido.com capacity so that we can also relay them to our team captains, who you'll meet in just a second. And then as the jury deliberates and later the final scores are announced, we'll have a polling question for you as well. So please go ahead, get ready, think what you might want to pose to the team captains, and in conversation, go ahead and put them in and I will get them to them. But now we'll move to one of our rotating judges. Nicola Kawaja from Chatham House is going to ask a question of the Policy Kings team lead, Sarah Sandbar.
Thanks so much for your presentation. So you mentioned in it the civilian impact analysis model. And I just wondered whether you could tell us a bit more about how you see that working in practice in terms of the model's development and then its implementation as a cornerstone for mainstreaming protection of civilians.
Thank you so much for your question. So to give a little context, we really approached this problem with two key limitations in mind regarding NATO and technology. First of all, NATO as an institution has a relatively limited capability to actually invest in the development of new technologies itself. Its procurement power is less than 1% of member states' procurement nationally speaking, and its security investment program is an even smaller percentage of that. But it does have two superpowers, we can say, that offset that, which is its ability to set strategic direction and agendas, and its interoperability and standardization factor. So the second one that we went into mind with was what actually new military technologies and defense capabilities mean. And our civilian impact analysis was really designed so that it could be applicable across a broad range of new technologies, whether those are, offensive weaponry used in kinetic operations, or whether they're cyber technologies used in hybrid operations. We needed something that could guide thinking and get decision makers and get developers to consider its impact. As you saw, we have these three areas: the norms, the ethics, the justice, the social impact, and the physical impact. And that was our way, just to address Renata's point, that was our way to bring in a bit more of this broader understanding of human security into our policy proposal.
Thank you very much, Sarah. We're going to move straight on to the Sciences Po team, and Romana Michelon has a question for the Sciences Po team captain, Pierre Pack.
Thank you so much. And thank you to both teams for all your really hard work and great ideas. I want to say, job really well done. You know that NATO cares a lot about the protection of civilians. And we also understand that civilians do not make up a homogeneous group. So my question would be, how do you think your ideas and your proposal will help ensure that NATO accounts for the security needs of men and women, boys and girls? Thank you so much and good luck.
Thank you very much for that question. That's a very valid point. We approached the question from an idea that we want to look at cities as a regional field and not as towards specific subgroups. So it is a very, very valid point to point out the fact that we did not do that. But we approached this idea from the point, where will the human plight, the human suffering be at its most in the theater of an urban, of warfare in general. And here we looked at the urban theater. And I think if we go one step further, we can ask ourselves, if we have this hyper-complex urban scenario with the complexity it has and the current standard of warfare, which will be the social groups or the societies groups that suffer the most dire consequences of the unapplicability of the current model. And in my opinion, that's where we are very close then to the questions of gender, of minority groups, of social groups, because those will be the first in the environment to suffer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pierre, for pointing out the challenge of density. I think that compounds all problems, even the ones that we see right now in pandemic times, both in terms of the pandemic and in terms of its economic effects. Our jury can deliberate so unbelievably fast that I'm very happy to turn it over to Dr. Tobias Leibwand for his last reflections and the announcement of the scores for these two teams.
Thank you so much, Catherine. It's my pleasure to announce the scores for those two teams. Congratulations also from my side. I'll be very brief. I just want to say how we're doing the scoring. So we have 4 categories from the jury. One is creativity. The next one is feasibility, presentation here in the pitch video. And then the last one is the teamwork during the hackathon. I want to remind us, you all had 4 days, 4 nights, not to create a video, but to actually understand the problem, drill deep, create a solution, and create the video. So congratulations to all of you. And of course, we had to compare across all the 10 pitch videos that we got. Thank you for those. And after careful deliberation, also taking into account the other pitches that are yet to come and your responses to these questions, the jury has awarded the King's College team 13 points in total out of 20. In particular, we were excited about hearing back how you worked as a team. You were a really strong team, really present, really active. That was fantastic. We felt there could have been a little more, as you've heard, on sort of the implementation and feasibility. So that's 13 points for King's College. Now for Sciences Po, we decided after careful deliberation to award 15 points out of 20. We were really impressed by your presentation. It was probably one of your strongest categories. We felt it could have been a tad bit more creative. Thank you.
All right, for all of those rooting along with your teams at home or with the ideas that these teams have presented, remember that your vote too matters in potentially putting all of these teams over the edge. You'll have a chance to poll and add your own points at the very end of this competition. But for now, very quickly, let's hear from you in our first Slido poll, asking what will be the biggest challenge for NATO, but for the world in 2030. You'll see some of our answers there: climate change, renewed global great power competition, cyber and new technology threats. All right, well, that seems to be a very obvious response. 100% of you, at least for now. Oh no, there we go. Other things are shifting rapidly in front of our eyes, and perhaps unsurprisingly, climate change and cataclysmic effects of both natural and man-made causes has caught up very quickly in this poll. We have just a few seconds left in this Q&A with you to determine the issues that we might need to think further, all of us collectively, as we look at the next only 9 years now. All right, I do still think that cyber won the day there. Thank you for your participation, for being present with us. On to round 2, without much ado, to the Arctic Circle and the gateway of the Arctic with Tromsø University, team Blue Unity Green Future, and all the way to Canada's West with Simon Fraser University, NATO's Mean Green Policy team for the second round, Less is More. Reducing military carbon emissions and preparing operations for climate change. Just like we did earlier, we will see the 2 pitches back to back. Our guest judges for this part of the competition are Zofia Burketti from the Political Affairs Division at NATO, and Owen Graffam, who runs the Energy, Environment, and Resources Department at Chatham House. Let's see the pitches.
Hello from Vancouver, Canada, on behalf of the Simon Fraser University NATO Field School team. As the Secretary-General says, climate change is making our world wilder, warmer, windier, and wetter. NATO, as a hub for continuous transatlantic exchange, can build the climate resilience of its allies and partners. But to do this, NATO needs to take concrete actions now to improve its ability to gather and assess data and its capacity to act on it. So first, some of my colleagues are going to show you some of the ideas we came up with on how NATO can improve its situational awareness.
Given the increasing accessibility of the Arctic Ocean, NATO must enhance its situational awareness in the high north. This is complicated by current orbital patterns of GPS satellites which render navigation systems unreliable. We propose that the Alliance coordinate efforts to develop the satellite infrastructure necessary to increase GPS coverage above the Arctic Circle. These satellites can provide high-resolution images of the terrain. They can also assist in collecting environmental data to produce long-term projections on likely operating conditions in the Arctic. Through this sort of voluntary joint development and joint ownership exemplified by NATO's strategic airlift capability, both the cost and benefits of this satellite program can be shared by Alliance members.
Social media platforms capture the lived experience of their users, which can be leveraged to provide an instant, on-the-ground view of evolving natural disasters. This information can be invaluable for those tasked with disaster response. So we propose that NATO leverage advances in AI and machine learning to gather real-time intelligence from social media platforms about developing crises. This information then can act as sort of a crowdsourced early warning system for emergent natural disasters. Open source information gathered from social media can be used to tailor NATO's post-disaster response by rapidly identifying priority areas. This advanced warning and on-the-ground perspective will give commanders charged with disaster response a better understanding of the challenges and improve their ability to act.
So building on these new ideas for how NATO can improve its situational awareness, my colleagues will now present some proposals on how NATO can act on this new information.
Because of the increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, military forces will be more regularly called upon to provide emergency assistance to civil authorities. We therefore propose that NATO increase the capacity of its forces by engaging the NATO Response Force in regular, large-scale disaster relief exercises designed by the Euro-Atlantic Disaster Response Coordination Center. Due to the rotational nature of the NRF, the experience and best practices gained by these units will filter naturally back into the member state militaries.
To prepare soldiers for ground conditions following a natural disaster, we propose investing in and deploying augmented reality simulations during training. Synthetic training environments offer a way to train soldiers in immersive conditions at a lower financial and environmental cost to running conventional exercises. NATO, building on its work with the Modeling and Simulation Center of Excellence, can act as a hub for best practices, harnessing current experiments in AR technology and sharing them with member states and partners alike.
Drawing on the success of gender advisors, NATO operations would benefit strongly from the introduction of climate advisors. They would be deployed on missions to advise commanders on how to best assess environmental impacts of operations and incorporate best practices.
To address a multidimensional threat like climate change, NATO needs to have a multidimensional approach. NATO must improve its resilience and coordination efforts by sharing best practices, data, and climate research with both allies and partners. We believe that by incorporating our policy suggestions, NATO will be able to improve its situational awareness and enhance its operations, making the Alliance a more resilient and relevant organization in the 21st century.
As presented in the Green Defense Framework by NATO, green accounting is needed to improve NATO's green image. Therefore, as a starting point, a baseline of current military greenhouse gas emissions should then be established. This monitoring will provide accurate data following green standards and principles among NATO structure. It will then produce a best practice repository in order to record the methodologies undertaken to prevent repeated work and learn from past interventions.
To facilitate the measuring of baselines, we propose a partnership program that will allow our member states to voluntarily initiate partnerships for information and technological interchange. Within the framework of NATO, we also believe that by giving nations this independence to organise their own partnerships, with assistance available through the Emerging Securities Challenges Division, or ESCD, we will facilitate high levels of cooperation whilst keeping in mind of NATO's motto, Animus inconsennando liber, a mind unfettered by deliberation. That being said, we think it's important that the partnership programme is free to work within NATO's Green Defence Framework and specifically the Smart Energy Team. Additionally, we feel these partnerships can benefit from existing NATO schemes such as the 000 Net initiative.
The ESCD currently undertakes monitoring and evaluation within its scope of operation for its existing sections. NATO, through ESCD, therefore, already possesses assets and information to perform monitoring and evaluation of greenhouse gas emissions. As a result, we propose that a new area within this existing framework will allow for greater focus on this issue. The greenhouse emissions section, as we would call it, would undertake the more specific duties of measuring greenhouse emissions, facilitating information gathering, and undertake all necessary tasks as dictated in its scope of operation. We believe that this is feasible because the ESCD has assets, strategic capacity, research and intelligence pool, to monitor and evaluate the greenhouse emissions of its members. Again, the newly created area from the pre-existing framework is practicable. This division would, first of all, assist in identifying and addressing the challenges the Alliance is likely to face in the near future.
The green emission section will aim to provide standardized methodology for data collection and measurement. Data analysis and subject matter experts from NATO's working groups will analyze the data to record progress for producing reliable data for annual reports, populating the platform for information sharing and best practices, and enabling allies and partners to contest the data. As a benefit, each of the allies and partners can develop their own framework in a sustainable manner and increase resilience.
To encourage nations to participate, we suggest the use of established incentives. The incentive that will drive by adopting this proposed policy would include an improvement in standardization, which will reduce overall cost and resource requirements. Furthermore, research and economic development through increased productivity and investment opportunity in initiatives such as the Green Technology Fund will allow member states to advance their own research in this area.
Green Technology Fund. NATO member states will have access to invest capital to the fund, invest into green research and foster technology. Access to this fund will depend on active participation into the partnership program. Thank you for Team Blue in the Green Forces.
Okay, fantastic. Linguistic lesson there at the end, in addition to some smart solutions around data analytics. Shashank Joshi is our permanent judge who will weigh in on these pitches.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for two very strong pitches. I was disappointed and slightly worried not to see that dinosaurs don't figure more prominently in NATO's strategic concept. So that's something to consider for our next round of discussions. Simon Fraser University, very strong ideas there. I thought you really tapped into something that I think is a powerful theme that I see in national security discussions, which is the power of open source intelligence, the idea of crowdsourcing for national disasters. And it taps into the idea that it's not just national technical expensive apparatuses of intelligence collection. There are often many, many more opportunities for states and alliances to get situational awareness via open sources. And I think how an alliance harnesses that is very much in keeping with the mood of discussion that I see amongst militaries and intelligence agencies. On your suggestion of Arctic satellites, what I'd like to have seen a little bit more of perhaps is a sense of where the commercial space is taking us in this direction. This is something in which teams of amateurs and private sector researchers are able to tap into a rich seam of commercially available imagery in many parts of the world. So is this something that needs to be done in the sense of joint ownership, joint development, or is this something that can be done via commercial means and tapping into that in new and more sort of agile ways? Tromsø University, a very complementary set of ideas there, not so much in terms of climate resilience, but in terms of green accounting and effectively reducing emissions. And again, that's something that I think very much fits in with national priorities that I see in all NATO armed forces. I think your focus on accounting is valuable, but what I'd also like to see a little bit more of is an emphasis on the military incentives here, the sort of opportunities for armed forces in reducing emissions in terms of feeding into this kind of framework. I know there's lots of interest in electric vehicles for resupply, in reducing heat emissions and reducing the signature of military vehicles by using electric vehicles rather than combustion engines. And I guess I'd like to hear a little bit more of not just the mechanism by which we measure these outputs, but how do we also incentivize member states and armed forces to actually meet these targets and get their emissions down as well. But both teams, congratulations on strong presentations and a very strong set of ideas, and thanks for all your hard work.
So while the jury hops on WhatsApp for their final deliberations on these two pitches, one of our rotating jury members, Sophie Brichetti from NATO, will ask a question of Tromsø University team captain Ewan Morse.
Well, thank you so much for both presentations. I'd like you to imagine that you've got 2 minutes with NATO Secretary-General, and you would really like to tell him about why is it so important for NATO and allies to reduce their military carbon emissions and prepare their operations for climate change. So what would you tell a NATO Secretary-General? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. So I think one of the major things we have to look at is that climate change is one of the biggest security challenges that we are facing collectively as a world. And if we wish to tackle this, we have to look at production of greenhouse emissions in all fields. And the military is actually one that produces a significant amount. The US Department of Defense actually uses more hydrocarbons than the entire nation of Denmark. So we're well aware that reduction of carbon emissions by these organizations is very important. And I think to kind of, sorry, could you ask the first part of your question again, sorry?
I was asking about the importance of NATO reducing its military carbon emissions and prepare its operations for climate change.
Yeah, sorry. So building on that, the idea is that we are looking at changing climates, and some nations are already being affected by climate change. For example, low-lying areas like the Netherlands. So I think it's important that NATO takes these kind of into account, and the more that we can act on climate change, the less we will actually have to change a lot of our kind of response abilities. I think it's therefore important that militaries take the lead on making the move to reduce carbon, especially because they are so vehicle-based, for instance. So, little things like moving non-operational and non-frontline vehicles to electric, kind of similar to what I think Joshi had suggested. So I think that one of the major incentives for the military is also that public perception plays an important part in budgets and how militaries are going to last into the future.
All right, thank you very much, Ewan, for those detailed responses. We're going straight to our other rotating judge in this round, and we'll have Owen Graffam ask a question of Simon Fraser team captain Harleen Atwal.
Thanks so much to both teams for the super presentations. I guess this builds on Shashank's point as well, but it strikes me that several of the suggestions that you made in your presentation, and in particular, the idea of crowdsourcing disaster data, would really benefit from building, I guess, non-traditional partnerships with NGOs and tech platforms. I guess, yeah, do you think that's something that would be beneficial for NATO and potentially why?
Yes, thank you for the question, and good morning to everyone in North America and good afternoon to those in Europe. And first, I'd just like to congratulate Tromso for these good ideas. And I absolutely agree with the idea of crowdsourcing. And the kind of just some background on how we got to this idea was that everyone is online these days. We're constantly tweeting and posting daily real-time updates. And we think that they would also do this when there's a climate-induced crisis. So crowdsourcing is a way of getting locals to help us on a voluntary basis to understand exactly what is going on. And this type of data is absolutely invaluable to Sakir and others tasked with determining how to respond to natural disasters, as well as how to allocate resources during a crisis, which provides accurate on-the-ground analysis. And to your other point as well, I think it's absolutely critical that NATO becomes a sort of hub for sharing expertise and information, as well as starting a transatlantic conversation on all of these points. We can't forget that NATO is the only sort of platform where European and North American allies meet every single day. So absolutely, NATO can be sort of a leader in this regard. And just to also add on to crowdsourcing, NATO does already have sort of climate data and an early warning system, but the social data that's gathered from crowdsourcing actually augments the sort of hard data. And the hard data wouldn't be able to understand the actual impact on society, while crowdsourcing can provide that sort of societal effect. For example, if there is a famine or civilian unrest or even rise in extremism as a sort of a implication or consequence of the climate or the natural disaster.
Thank you, Harleen. Thank you for being up early, fueled by coffee and perhaps gummy bears to be with us all the way from Western Canada. Our jury, again, has nimbler fingers than I could have ever imagined, and they too have a result for this group with Owen and Sophie's participation. So again, over to Tobias Leifert.
Yes, we do have results. Thank you so much. Very amazing pitches and great responses. I will start with Tromsø University. The jury has awarded you 11 points in total out of the 20. We felt like your strongest category was creativity, a category that you might have been a little stronger in this presentation, but we did take into account a very, very good response, Ewan. Congratulations on that. You've done your team a good service. So congratulations over to you. And now next to Simon Fraser University. The jury has decided to award you 16.5 points, which by my counting is a very high score so far. We are a tough jury. 20 is the max. Still 5 points to come or more points to come from the voting later on. But so that's a pretty good intermediate result. We really liked the presentation. Was your strongest category. On the feasibility, maybe a little bit of room for improvement. And at this point, thanks to all the lead mentors who not only helped the teams, but also helped us in the jury judge how good you were performing as a team and how you were coming together, because this also was part of our deliberation. Thank you.
Yes, what you can't see is that not only did these teams have mentorship through the process, but they also connected among one another. And I'm privileged to see the chat, which is to see that these competing teams are in fact cheering each other on in the Zoom chat we have here. So I think that speaks for great unity on these policy ideas and a willingness to take this forward. So we're gonna, just before we move on to pitch number 3, here's a little animation to get you thinking about NATO's role in the future.
When you hear the word NATO, you probably think of the military. And that makes sense. NATO is the most successful military alliance in history, but NATO is much more than that. It's also a place for political dialogue and debate. It's the only organization that brings Europe and North America together around the table every day. We discuss a wide range of issues that concern our shared security, from cyber threats and terrorism to pandemics and climate change. In a family of 30 nations, we sometimes have our differences. NATO is an essential platform to tackle our differing views and to shape common approaches. But although we may sometimes disagree, we are united in our shared commitment to standing together and protecting each other. When we work, act, and speak together, we send a powerful message to the world, and we promote the democratic values on which our alliance is based. NATO 2030, securing an uncertain future.
Well, how these values should find resonance in NATO's continued and possibly expanded mission in 2030 is the topic of this next series of pitches that pits two river cities against one another, Universidade Portucalense from the Douro River in Porto, Portugal, and from the Charles River here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the Harvard Kennedy International Order. Our rotating guest judges for this part of the competition are Beza Unal, the Deputy Director with the International Security Program at Chatham House, and Tomáš Šindelar, Policy Officer, Political Affairs and Security Division at the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. All right, let's see those pitches.
The Alliance is navigating through a tumultuous sea, is weathering the storm and proving naysayers wrong. The darkest hour comes before dawn. Are we at the darkest hour? Wave after wave, uncertainty clouds our judgment. So how can we future-proof the most successful alliance in history? That's a challenge. And the world changes, but NATO also adapts. But it never loses the commitment with its mission, which shall defend a great alliance of democratic states. As NATO is walking towards a more political agenda, the reconceptualization of warfare and security is essential. Cooperation and communication prevail among the younger generations, and it's from that mindset that soft power measure needs to be implemented. A solid first step is our future-proof communication strategy, engaging young generations because we believe only NATO youth can make NATO future-proof. But how? First, through universities. Have you ever been curious to do a model NATO in your university, but you didn't know how? For instance, model European unions are organized all over the globe, 12 outside the EU and in total 28 in the last 2 years. The reason why there are so many is because they are decentralized. This could be easily done for NATO, where staff and diplomats could be provided to enrich a model NATO. More importantly, we need to implement a handbook that is free, available online and easy to understand. It's practical, feasible, and it has zero costs. But above all, it will embed liberal democratic ideas and construct a mentality pro-NATO. But wait a minute, what happened to the Manfred Warner Essay Award? It inspired future leaders in the past to advance research on NATO, so why not bring it back and create thematic areas within the award? This will allow NATO to promote its strengths and differentiating factors and enhance dialogue and cooperation between NATO nations and partner countries. By the way, we urgently need a Council of Youth Representatives, a body that is consultative and that can advise and provide an alternative security vision to Brussels. With this, NATO creates a permanent body of youth ambassadors from each of the members of the alliance and partners. They will convene virtually, so it's practical, it's free of charges, and it's more sustainable. It would promote the inclusivity of young minds in the collective defense of NATO's core values and get security topics onto the young people's radar. But what is already on young people's radar? The answer is simple. We believe in cooperation, communication, and solidarity, and this is why we bring We Are NATO Plus to you, a voluntary initiative created by youth for youth. A communication measure created to get people to volunteer in local NGOs through NATO, representing the alliance. That makes NATO accessible to everyone that wants to help and belong to the community that is NATO youth. This is a dual program engaging 4 different areas. Education and gender equality will be open to everyone between the ages of 18 to 35, while societal resilience and cybersecurity will require a specific set of skills. The application process is meant to be accessible and dynamic and available to all member states and partners. Our goal is to bring youth closer to NATO, building a relationship on trust, transparency, and common values. By volunteering, the youth can learn about NATO in a more meaningful way, while sharing and promoting the 70-year-old alliance core values. This voluntary experience is sponsored by multinationals, consultants, think tanks, and foundations who, like us, believe in the importance of youth for future resilience. This is a game changer. We are NATO Plus, we will redefine NATO's image in the world, and now we are wondering, are you future-proof? We are, so join us in becoming agents of change.
We are NATO!
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for taking my call. We here in Springfield, Massachusetts in the United States have been the victim of a disinformation campaign.
Of course, happy to help. Tallinn has a long history of that.
I need to take urgent action. Our City Operations Center is beginning to tackle the misinformation campaign, but as a fellow member of the NATO Global City Initiative, what steps do I need to take now?
NATO GLI is a network of 30 and counting cities across the alliance that share knowledge and expertise through NATO-administered platform. NATO Global Cities also co-create trainings and wargame simulations with NATO Centers for Excellence.
Since 1949, the values and rules-based liberal order, led by NATO as member states, has secured the lives and livelihoods of all NATO citizens and provided hope to global citizens. But the threats we face now are different. Today's and tomorrow's threats are dynamic, multipolar, multidimensional. They come from social media, cyberspace, and new digital environments. There is no longer a well-defined theater of conflict. The front line is now in your community and our cities and towns. So who will tackle these new security challenges? It's our local administrators, our mayors, our politicians, and community leaders.
State adversaries increasingly exploit societal vulnerability to undermine governance. A top-down approach is not enough to prevent this. Instead, NATO should expand its ecosystem, leveraging the inclusive approach across the alliance. With the initiative, local officials can use its unique security expertise to share best practices to tackle the threats.
NATO GLI will launch a new 30 for 30 city network with two components. First, a digital platform run by NATO's Policy and Planning Unit, where cities can exchange knowledge and expertise and gain access to training materials and toolkits so we're all prepared for new threats.
This engagement of community leaders will help address emerging security issues and draw in partners beyond traditional stakeholders.
NATO global cities will participate in joint wargaming and training exercises on threats that are most relevant to local communities. Cities that have specific experience will be paired up with the relevant centers of excellence to co-create and co-fund simulations. The result? Something like the Locked Shields exercise, but for the local level.
We propose to include the initiative in NATO's 2030 strategy, announcing the objective to wrap up to 30 cities by 2030 at the NATO summit. Cities and member states can put themselves forward to their NATO delegation. The cities selected by the alliance will be asked to commit to the NATO GLI principles based on NATO's charter.
The NATO Global to Local Initiative 30 for 30 reinvigorates security in NATO and adapts our collective security to address the threats of 2030 and beyond. Threats are all around us, and it will oftentimes be our community leaders who must face them. With NATO's Global to Local Initiative, they are not alone. With this expansion of NATO's traditional ecosystem through the Global to Local Initiative, NATO will support a whole new range of stakeholders to collectively defend our values and liberal international order. To secure peace for the future,
NATO must go from global to local.
Sme spolu silniejsi.
Sat tachat hai.
Suntem mai puternici împreună.
Nous sommes plus forts ensemble. Aqua Mabab.
Sind wir stärker.
Together we are stronger indeed in as many languages as this team could muster. I'm beginning to sense a bunch of themes here that I think will be very critical and direct anchors for NATO. But Renata, how did you feel about these pitches? Your brief comments, please.
I think I'm on the next one.
We can head straight to...
No, but let me just very briefly say fabulous bridges. I loved the youthfulness. I loved the joie de vivre. I loved the openness and the engagement, and particularly liked the talking head / of our first colleagues, of our Portuguese colleagues. It was really, really great. Perhaps maybe just a question on the NATO handbook. I wasn't entirely convinced that that would be an immediate seller, but I loved your idea of revisiting some of our prizes and some of our engagements. With regard to our colleagues in the Harvard, loved the animations in particular, was very, very cool, and particularly liked the focus on the locals of the cities. I thought that worked very well as a slogan and engagement. A little bit challenging in terms of how that can be manifest along with some of NATO's current structures and mechanisms, but I think that that will be something that the questions come out in a little bit. So very much just to say enjoyed it, but I'll hand over to our questions. Thank you.
Speaking of questions, Dr. Beza Unal, you get to lob the first question at Harvard's team captain, Izzy Ernst.
Thank you very much. Izzy, I found your group's global to local initiative a really innovative one. I would like to, however, understand how this fits in the implementation and expanding NATO's values. Can you give us a concrete example of what type of simulations the NATO city level network could engage in? And how effective would cities be to defend those values that are based on international order? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Una, for that question. So our initiative is really focused on these new borderless invisible threats that are increasingly going to hit at the community level, which is why we think it's so important to engage them in the notion of collective security and recognize them as principal actors. Concretely, this means that NATO can really leverage the framework that exists within the Alliance for Cooperation and Building Trust and tactical expertise across borders. So if you imagine that there is a misinformation campaign that is targeted specifically at one local level, it is really about equipping the municipalities and local administrations to better prepare for that scenario and prepare for an attack by leveraging expertise that might sit elsewhere in the alliance already. So if you're thinking about a concrete example, if Prague has experienced misinformation campaigns before and knows how to set up the right command and control structure within their municipalities to make sure that information is shared and flows properly and within control, they can share that expertise with municipalities in other places in the alliance that might have not had the same experience yet. And we think that NATO has the mechanisms to facilitate that through either connecting these municipalities, but then also co-creating trainings together and leveraging the resources that already exist. The Center of Excellence, a lot of them are doing really critical work on these new threats already. And what the Global to Local initiative does is taking these resources that are already there, but expanding it to the new context that we think is going to be increasingly important in the 21st century.
So recentering NATO's node function down to the local level. Thank you, Izzy. We're moving on to a question from our other rotating judge in this segment. Tomasz Schindler is asking a question of Portucalense University's team captain, the Lusiads, Marta Thorby.
Well, congratulations to both teams, in fact, to all teams for this heroic effort. My question relates to the idea of a NATO volunteer program, the We Are NATO Plus, as you labeled it. So Marta, imagine you have a friend who's interested in volunteering with a local NGO. The question is, why should that person apply for this NATO program rather than contacting that particular NGO directly? In other words, how would the NATO program be different from other existing volunteering opportunities on the market?
Well, first of all, good morning and good afternoon to everyone watching from home. Thank you for your question. It is obviously a very good question. So basically, the difference between NATO's volunteering program and every other NGO that is doing volunteering programs is that NATO is a big alliance and a big organization, as it is the European Union and as it is the United Nations. But what happens when you're such a big organization? You receive too many volunteers, and this happens in the European Solidarity Corps and in the United Nations voluntary programs. And I'm speaking from experience because I've already tried to apply, and it's very difficult, very bureaucratic. So what we thought as a team is to make it decentralized in a way that it will get so many volunteers, and we will be able to get the volunteers to actually be able to be in the field as NATO ally members, and to engage the youth in the promotion of values within this organization. This is our difference. NATO is about partnerships and democratic values, and we are adding youth to the program. I think this is our big difference. And working through NGOs, we will be helping local NGOs that maybe don't have enough volunteers, and we'll be helping NATO in promoting and sharing its values. And we will be giving an education on NATO and its core values and the important areas that we talked about, like education, gender equality, cybersecurity, and societal resilience. Also, I would like to add to answer Dr. Renata's point of view about the handbook. I would just like to say that it's our most practical measure, most easy to implement. And we also speak from experience within this team. It is not easy and accessible to do a model NATO in our universities. And that's what we want to do, especially because NATO is an expert at making handbooks. So I think this is an easy measure, zero costs, and would do very well in universities, especially in our type of bachelor's and master's degrees. I hope I answered all your questions.
I can assure you that the NATO Public Diplomacy Division is paying very close attention, and I'm sure is taking very detailed notes, particularly on those latter suggestions. All right, so as per usual, the judges have worked with lightning speed, and it's my great pleasure to turn it over to Shashank Joshi to let us know how the jury has decided.
Hello, everyone. Okay, thank you both for an excellent set of presentations. Portucalense, you were on, after careful consideration, you were on 14 points. We thought your presentation was very strong and we were thought it very engaging. Congratulations for that. We thought we could have seen a little bit more creativity in your proposals, but we were still pleased to see those that you had. Harvard University, you have edged ahead on 16.5 points. For those tracking at home in the absence of a Eurovision Song Contest style tracker board, that means you are on par with Simon Fraser University. So we have some drama for the subsequent rounds as we continue. And we thought that your presentation was also extremely engaging. We perhaps could have seen a little bit more on the implementation and the feasibility of your ideas, but thank you for engaging with our questions as well.
My own unbiased adrenaline is rising, and I want to just remind all of you on this particular Zoom, this LinkedIn feed, that you too will have a chance to vote on all of these pitches. So I hope you're taking critical notes at home. They might be those votes that put your team ahead. And I think given that we're now in literally a numeric head-to-head competition, you might have some work to do. So on to round 4, and from the heart of Prague and the intellectual hub of Charles University comes Team Emperor's Finest, rooted in the tradition of intellectual thought, facing off against Berlin's gritty future technocrats from the Freie Universität Berlin. Our guest judges for this round are Moritz Zimmermann, who works on innovation at NATO, and Yasmina Fina, who's the research assistant for the International Security Program. Let's see the pitches.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth, a NATO technology strategist. Today, the technology that NATO uses is cutting edge. But there is a but. There is no guarantee that this will still be the case in 2030. My job is to make sure that it will. Challenges exist. Strategic competitors invest heavily in innovation. We need to keep up.
Hi, I'm Charles, a lone wolf innovator and a founder of a startup specializing in military AI development. My problem is that I have brilliant ideas that I don't know how to realize. I'm one of those who are not afraid to take risks and experiment, which is what innovation requires. But those lucrative contracts always go to the big dogs. Where can I go to be heard?
Yeah, wouldn't it be great if NATO actually connected these two people to get the most out of their brilliant minds? Charles, Elizabeth, listen up. I'm Niels from the Emperor's Finest, and we might just have the solution for you. We, the Emperor's Finest, take on the challenge to maintain NATO's position at the forefront of both technological and conceptual innovation. It is our mission to seek and catalyze technology and innovation wherever it may be found within our alliance, and to make sure that NATO owns the next generation's technologies. NATO's future superiority lies in advancing existing initiatives such as the NATO Technology App Store and the NATO Incubator, as well as best practices from the agile startup community. The private sector, most notably smaller businesses, offer critical edge manufacturing and applied research. Academic institutions work on conceptual innovation, developing models while influencing and being influenced by the latest technologies. NATO's innovation future is made by risk takers. To empower NATO means to empower bold ideas. Just as NATO offers security to its people, NATO must also offer security to small companies. Innovations and intellectual property must be protected and funding ensured to foster a culture of risk-taking. To establish and uphold the innovation ecosystem, this proposal unlocks the value from underserved actors amongst technical schools and SMEs to find tomorrow's technology mavericks seeking something beyond mere profit margins. To this end, our proposal centers around the formation of a trends unit, whose remit is to spot trends, conduct outreach, headhunt, and showcase new talents through a series of challenges. This unit is formed of core NATO stakeholders and external advisors from academia and venture capital. The board proactively identifies and approaches those unaware of their product's dual-use capacity and incentivizes cooperation through legal security and funding. NATO Neuron and NATO Campus work respectively to provide critical fora for an open exchange of ideas, a prospect which remains the greatest catalyst to innovation and allows NATO to tap into unvetted talent while de-risking innovation prospects.
Wow! I didn't even think about reaching out to NATO. Elizabeth, are you going to NATO Campus?
Wow, that sounds great. Yeah, definitely. I'll see you there.
Technology moves fast. Being at the forefront of defending democratic principles, NATO is at risk of under-innovating. To keep our alliance at the cutting edge of technology, we must reconcile existing relationships and tap into overlooked reservoirs of knowledge. To become an early adopter of new technologies, we must both catalyze the innovation and procurement of new technologies. With the future lying ahead of us, we must close our ranks, stay true to our values, to inspire the best in us, and to see opportunities where others see challenges.
Picture this, introducing Sarah, a tech-savvy student from Technical University in Munich, Germany. Sarah is looking for an opportunity to develop her idea for optimizing blockchain networks. A big tech corporation is on the hunt. They strike and invest in the idea to develop it for their own. NATO is left empty-handed, missing out on Sarah's innovation. No more. We want to show you how NATO can start profiting from young, innovative ideas in order to improve the alliance's competitive technological edge. Because NATO 2030 is about future readiness and ensuring peace through technological innovation.
In our vision, Sarah's university is a member of the NATO Bright Minds community, which facilitates the communication of problem tenders to universities. It connects young people, like Sarah, from across the alliance and engages them with NATO's future. In the community, Sarah meets Lucia, an aerospace engineer from Portugal, and Stan, a Canadian business student. They put their diverse creative approaches and multi-perspective capabilities to use in response to a tender on airplane communication security. They receive an invitation to the NATO Integrated Accelerator. The accelerator identifies promising solutions and supports initiatives with tailor-made support and funding. It offers the team a combined funding model from interested elite nations and a venture capital fund that sees commercial potential. Through the NATO Outgoing Exchange Program, Sarah and her team is complemented with a NATO officer from NATO Airbase Geilenkirchen who is directly connected to the end use of the proposed technology. In this way, there's continuous spillover between operational and creative processes. After developing a minimum viable product, the team can put its software directly to test at the Innovation Maneuver, an annual field exercise with the Elite Center for Analysis and Simulation to test their prototype and gather additional data. They do so together with NATO operational staff, tech experts, and other invited startups on site. There, their idea is rated as very promising and exits the innovation system to be upscaled within a larger NATO framework. NATO pilots still identified problems with the learning and application processes of the software. This new problem is then posted as an innovation tender to the NATO Bright Minds community platform. Here, young specialists like Sarah can find innovative and creative solutions to problems directly experienced by NATO personnel in the field. They are not asked for the best way to build a bridge, but for the best way to cross the water. The NATO Science and Technology Elite Research for Peace is a revolutionary and broadly applicable innovation development model to integrate and foster new ideas and approaches from academia and the private sector. As a concurrent design process and iterative in nature, it is possible for different stakeholders to enter the innovation cycle at every point. If ideas are not ready or prove incomplete, they are not disregarded but put back into the cycle to generate necessary additional solutions. The model brings together conceptual creativity, technological expertise, and operational application, all key ingredients to sharpening nature's technological edge. NATO STAR attracts young bright minds and startups through a new peace-focused framing. It provides them with an infrastructure to see their idea through. Hence, we call on you to start the process of science, technology, and elite research today to ensure brilliant young minds like Sarah find their way into NATO's future for a better NATO 2030.
So all we needed to do was wait a little moment to have the technology questions from pitch 1 answered now in pitch 4. So we are going to come whole and full circle. Tobias Leibrand will offer some comments on these pitches briefly as we're running a little behind.
Absolutely. Congratulations to both Charles and Fire University. I'll be brief. Charles University, fantastic idea to connect innovative communities. We felt it was very creative. It's really important. It's something that might be happening right now more at the individual level of member countries on the tender level, but you brought this idea to bring that to the entire alliance, which we really liked. What we would have liked to have seen is how to do that exactly. So it could have given us a little bit more meat on the bones. Really clever storytelling, really creative, really like that also in your production. Freie Universität, very impressed also by your pitch, your idea, also with the 4 elements and the star coming together and sort of this being the climax of your pitch video. Fantastic use of your 4 minutes that you were allotted. Really good, really creative in the concreteness of your description, which we felt like really sticks out in the pitches. So congratulations to you as well.
Fantastic. So we're not going to waste any time. We're going to go straight to Moritz Zimmermann, our guest jury here, who will ask a question of our team lead from Charles University, Jessica Poon.
Hey, Jessica, thanks a lot. First, I would like to take a quick step back here and basically just ask you about the wider implications of innovative technologies for NATO's deterrence and defense. Could you name maybe one major challenge related to new technologies that we're facing and one major technological opportunity that the Alliance might want to capitalize on? Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for that question and for this opportunity as well, and great presentation from Berlin as well. So I wanted to say that one of the things that we were really building on was this lack of sort of robust ethical frameworks. You can probably see from our presentation that, we had a lot of inspiration from sort of startup culture, very sort of agile work and management culture, and sort of getting people who are underserved into that funnel. But in terms of what, is really missing from the innovation ecosystem on a sort of wider basis is sort of robust ethical frameworks. And of course, NATO at the core of its mission is about peacekeeping and about sort of, uniting all these communities. And we like to think that our group motto was move fast and mend things. So taking that sort of epithet from big tech and correcting it. So we didn't just see our policy as building on NATO's problems and just troubleshooting an existing set of problems in, siloed spheres. We wanted to reconcile them and really, really bring the heart of disruption to a point of really considering ethical frameworks as well. And in terms of how NATO can leverage that, we were talking about ownership and sort of the lack of sort of ownership and sort of support with patents and, how we could all bring this into the framework, because we think this is kind of an area that NATO is lacking in, because obviously it sits at the forefront of cutting edge military technology. But in terms of really owning that technology for tomorrow and for the benefit of these wider communities in this alliance, that's something which we thought was overlooked and wanted to bring back into the fore. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. Very quick response also from Stefan Neumann, who's receiving his question from our other rotating jury member, Yasmin Afina.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very excellent presentation. So Stefan, I have one question. At some point you mentioned, like at the beginning, you mentioned the issue of youth and young talent going towards the private sector and NATO missing out on their innovation, potential and talent. So you outline in detail the Star for Peace program, which will address this issue, but how would you address the issue of competitivity? How can you persuade the youth to invest their time and talent by going to NATO instead, let's say, one of the major tech companies? How would you convince them that NATO is the way to go?
Thank you so much for your question, Ms. Alfina. I think it points right in the right direction. We do think that NATO can build on an existing structure here with the university networks that are already existing, and that head of the innovation unit, Rob Murray, has also suggested to expand. And we can here really attract young talent, both entrepreneurs and technical talent, before they leave university through this university network and these tenders. You could also tell the story. You can tell the story of our pitch starting at any one point along the four elements. You could also start with a tender where you can then be assured that if you provide a solution, it is developed with you and with the help of NATO from ideation to application. That's something that very few people can offer on the private market, this level of support. And I think that's really a unique selling point for young entrepreneurs, young scientists to engage with NATO for a better future and for a peaceful future.
Stefan, NATO will undoubtedly be happy to hear that it's not about paying the salaries of tech companies, that there are other incentives that you have just pointed to that could make your vision a reality. Well, okay, jury, again, lightning speed deliberation. And so before we hear from Renata Dwan on those final scores, we're going to see a quick animation about how NATO thinks about its future military power.
The world has changed dramatically since NATO was founded more than 70 years ago, and the pace of change continues to accelerate. We see huge advances in technology, including quantum computing and artificial intelligence, which will change our lives and affect our security. We also see an assertive Russia, cyber and missile threats, and brutal terrorist groups such as ISIS. To keep our almost 1 billion people safe, NATO must remain a strong military alliance. So we must continue to invest in the right forces with the right equipment, and to keep our technological edge in a competitive world. To have strong militaries, we also need strong societies. That is why we must boost our resilience. This means robust infrastructure such as ports and airports, telecommunications, including 5G, and diverse supply lines for fuel, food, and medical equipment. In an unpredictable world, our strong militaries protect our democracies, our freedom, and our prosperity. Our unwavering commitment that an attack against one of us is an attack against all of us is a shield that keeps our societies safe and secure. NATO 2030, securing an uncertain future.
So actually, Shashank has done the important tabulation. So Shashank, over to you for the numbers.
Okay, thank you both for fantastic presentations. Charles University, we were very impressed with your teamwork, the way you developed your ideas. It was fabulous. And Jess, well done for, I think, a very coherent and thoughtful answer to what was a tough question. So we have also absorbed and reflected that in our scores, and we have awarded you 14.5 points. For University Berlin, we thought that was a really, really good set of ideas. And personally, I was really impressed with your attention to detail, real thought on the ideas, and really detailed, thoughtful implementation. So well done. And we have awarded you a storming 18.5 points. So well done.
Oh, 18.5 points. Things just got manically more competitive. So again, your audience poll might put one other university right up there in the ranking. So congratulations for moving ahead there. All right, straight on to round 5. From one of Europe's oldest cities, UNESCO World Heritage Site, Vilnius University with the Invulnerable team. And they're facing off against our second US American competitor, Johns Hopkins and the Jazers. So our guest judges for this particular round are Marjorie Buxa, who leads the Digital Society and Initiative at Chatham House, and Elisa Zeit from NATO Public Diplomacy. And in round 5, our students considered full spectrum security, building resilience against economic security risks. Let's roll the pitches.
This is Tim. Tim is a fellow citizen of NATO member state. A student who has lost his job and financial security due to pandemic, businesses shutting down, and society unrest. Tim is feeling scared, vulnerable, and uncertain about his future. This is NATO. NATO has a new 3-dimensional economic resilience plan, Invulnerables 2030, that would enable every NATO member state citizen to adapt to the political economic impact of COVID-19 on individual, state, and organizational levels. So what does this plan propose? After ending the Economic Committee in 2010, economics became a less well-regarded part of NATO. Due to the deterioration of focus on the economy, NATO is unable to proactively react to economic challenges caused by unexpected global events like COVID-19. NATO needs more specialists in economic security and to build more cooperation and representation of more international organizations. Structural changes are necessary in order to effectively react to new economical challenges. Therefore, a revision of the defense financing system is required. Financial benchmark, fixed amount of money. It could replace the current 2% GDP military spending commitment. The benchmark could be reviewed periodically, depending on the financial fluctuations. A part of financial benchmark funds could go to a financial cushion. It could be used by an individual member state in an emergency situation if they are unable to fulfill their military spending commitments. A new educational NATO fund should be established to mobilize the public and raise awareness of new security threats, including health and economic threats, before an actual crisis occurs. NATO members should cooperate on investing in dual-use technologies and critical infrastructure. It benefits not only the security and economics of the particular member state, but it also contributes to collective NATO's economic resilience. As an individual, by increasing your own competences in different fields and contributing more to the state economy, you, as a societal unit of alliance, contribute to increasing NATO's economic resilience.
Why raising competences in unfamiliar fields is actually important. For increasing your competences, contributing to economic resilience, and have better career opportunities.
Raising citizen awareness and economic resilience and security matters through formal and informal education that helps citizens to be flexible, quick to adapt to unforeseen situations, and that is a win for all. We believe that by following this plan, future generations will be ready for tomorrow's challenges.
Determine ways and means for the Alliance to strengthen resilience against predatory foreign direct investment and other means of economic influence or geoeconomic risk. Let's break this down. What is resilience, why does it matter, and why is it so important to prevent predatory economic influence? Put simply, resilience is the ability to resist or adapt to a changing environment. In a highly uncertain world, resilience is key not just for our capacity to innovate, but also to secure freedom and prosperity. Looking to 2030, we believe that one of these great uncertainties will be foreign direct investment. Predatory FDI could endanger critical infrastructure. How? By creating a dependence on nations whose interests conflict with our own. As members of Gen Z, we urge governments to act proactively rather than reactively, to protect the critical infrastructures that support our economic life. Let's take a look at some of these key infrastructures. For each of these infrastructures, there are short-term vulnerabilities and long-term risks. Every element of these networks is highly integrated and mutually dependent. So, if one element is disrupted or damaged, then all the others may be affected. We can call these vulnerabilities choke points. The key question is, do we have enough redundancy in our infrastructure to absorb near-term disruptions? Or are they fraught with choke points? Long-term uncertainties and risks arise through innovation. Emerging technologies have the potential to transform or even replace these critical infrastructures. But with great impact can come great consequences. These disruptive technologies might enhance the alliance's economic growth or could damage it if they fall into the wrong hands. We need to remain vigilant, organized, and predictive in order to manage these uncertainties and risks. Let's take a deeper look at one example. Take COVID-19. Only 1 year later, and we are lucky enough to have a vaccine being distributed throughout NATO countries. But what if it weren't an alliance member that developed the vaccine? What if a country, unfriendly toward the alliance, had synthesized the only known vaccine and was unwilling to do business? Or, if they were willing to sell to us, would we even trust their technology? We would be living in a very different world right now if this were the case. We can't rely on luck alone. There are a lot of emerging technologies, but which one will be most important for ensuring our economic stability and safety? We need a way to identify and invest in the innovations that will be critical to our future as an alliance. We believe that it is possible for NATO to stay ahead of these disrupting technologies by following 3 simple steps: monitor, prepare, and invest. NATO should create an innovation committee that keeps track of and evaluates the potential risk of emerging technologies. Monitoring these flagged technologies through their production process, this committee can issue early warnings to allies when they believe that a certain technology reaches a critical level of risk or value. This approach is crucial for giving member countries enough time to prepare responses. Next, NATO can expand the framework of existing departments like CFIUS to create a procedure for vetting serious international investors. A NATO vetting committee can create a pool of verified investors that are allowed to fund any NATO member company without worrying about further vetting in the future. Finally, once a pool of verified investors has been created, their investments to companies within the alliance can be facilitated through a clearinghouse. The clearinghouse will keep track of investor money with AllyPay, a distributed ledger based on blockchain technology. This system ensures a transparent, immutable, and secure transaction log for the lifetime of these ventures, the perfect audit trail. NATO will know exactly who owns what ventures and will not need to be concerned about conflicting national interest. This 3-step proposal will equip the alliance with the ability to be at the forefront of disruptive emerging innovation. Proactive monitoring, preparation, and investment are key in minimizing risk and uncertainty from the outset so that resilience can be increased and preserved. Our solution is thus an investment in the future, a future of freedom, peace, and prosperity for today, 2030, and beyond.
Shashank, a fusion of how The Economist thinks about a number of these issues, economic problems as challenges for the oldest functional defense alliance in the world. Shashank, your comments on these 2 pitches briefly.
Thank you both. Okay, I think what jumps out at me is this sense of how much these challenges really overlap with the work of other international institutions as well. What a crowded space this is when we discuss resilience, particularly economic resilience, which is not necessarily a sort of core comfort area for the Alliance. And I think that really is a thread that perhaps touches on all of the things we've discussed today, and we should reflect on at the end. How do we disentangle some of this work that is done by allied states, but also done by the European Union, which of course has a sort of much bigger role in thinking about economic resilience. On the question of foreign direct investment, that again taps in to a very powerful national mood, awareness of supply chain security, awareness of strategic competitors investing in key industries which are dual use or have strategic economic implications. But I think one of the big challenges here is, of course, this is such a sensitive political area. How do you persuade allies that this is not a power grab, that this is not something impinging on sovereignty or impinging on debates that are already incredibly fraught over things like Nord Stream 2 or the Belt and Road Initiative? So I think this throws up a lot of really, really interesting questions.
Well, that was succinct and to the point. We can go a little deeper, if briefly, with answers from our team members. And Chatham House rotating jury member Marjorie Buxa will ask a question of the Vilnius University team.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you to Vilnius University team for their presentation. I particularly appreciate the focus on the individual resilience and the story of Tim, the student. Now, in your presentation, you offer a series of recommendations from upgrading NATO financial system to creating an educational fund. If you were to boil down the essence of your proposal, which of these recommendations do you think NATO should prioritize in 2030 and why?
Hello, thank you for the question. Our team believes that the dynamic threats require multidimensional solutions. So we believe that NATO should prioritize education, since educated citizens of state members are more resilient to threats from the outside. Also, we believe that infrastructure and technologies should be #1 priority, because every state should be more investing into their infrastructure, since we all seen what kind of consequences has the COVID-19 pandemic. So we believe that, for example, the economic committee, which would be reestablished, could give advices on what technologies would be useful for not only one state, but also for all the states, how they should cooperate. Thank you.
And Elisa Zayat gets to ask the question of David Calvo and the keen animators from Johns Hopkins University.
Thank you, Catherine. And first of all, also thank you to the JASers and the Invulnerables to presenting two fantastic pictures with great visuals and illustrations. Now, my question is related to your proposed pooled investment process, pooled vetting investment process, and it very much goes in line with what Yoshi just said about the sensitivity of allied sovereignty and critical infrastructure. So given that NATO works on consensus, how would you see allies to come to such a consensus on your proposed pooled investment vetting process when we have so many different views on investments in critical infrastructure in the alliance? You've talked about 5G, the section has picked it up before. So how would you get everyone together to rally around the flag for this one? Thank you.
Absolutely, that's a great question. I think that the easiest way to explain it is that the vetting committee, as we envision it, is a CFIUS-like entity that would be responsible for investigating and approving these investors. They would operate on regulations put forth by the NSO, and ideally the committee would be composed of individuals familiar with similar standards and frameworks already existing within the alliance. We think that the incentive for NATO states is that they can quickly find vetted investors for their innovative companies without the need for their own national vetting process. However, we do see that countries like the US and organizations like the EU have their own vetting processes, and we would think that as long as they meet the requirements set forth by NSO, you would have a way for domestic investors to join this larger international pool of vetted investors. Thank you.
Thank you, David. While our jury makes the final deliberations and Renata announces the winner of this round, or the scores for this round, let's take another look at how NATO is already thinking of dealing with what it perceives to be the 2030 challenges.
NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and we are a unique alliance of 30 countries from Europe and North America. But in today's interconnected world, the challenges we face are global. Disinformation campaigns, cyber attacks, terrorism, climate change, and pandemics like COVID-19 cross borders and require global cooperation. We also see a shift in the global balance of power with the rise of China and increased competition over our values and our way of life. No country or continent can go it alone in this increasingly uncertain world. That's why we have built a community of like-minded nations and organizations all around the world. Together, using this global network, we can share information and ideas, and that will help us face the world's biggest challenges. In uncertain and turbulent times, it's good to have friends. NATO will continue to be a reliable partner to countries and organizations who share our values and our vision for building a free, cooperative world in the decades to come. NATO 2030, securing an uncertain future.
Well, all of our pitches have underlined the node function of NATO and partnering with all manner of diverse actors. So I think that is the one critical joint lesson we can take away from all these pitches. Renata, do you have the final scores for this final round and the face-off between Johns Hopkins and Vilnius University?
Thank you so much, Catherine. And what another two fantastic presentations. Really, we've been blown away as judges by the quality of the presentations and also the quality of your responses. So great responses, folks. Maybe turning to Vilnius, we thought you were a fantastic team. You worked so well together throughout this exercise, and we very much liked your pitch at the citizen level and explaining the story of citizens' concerns and what NATO, why NATO is so relevant for citizens and their concerns and worries at a moment of great insecurity. We were perhaps a little bit less sure on the feasibility and the practicality of your proposal for a reinvigorated economic committee. So we decided to award you a total of 13.5, and congratulations, Vilnius. Moving on to Johns Hopkins University, we very much liked your presentation, and we particularly liked the animation. We wanted to give a shout out to that. Must have been an incredible amount of work to the team. And liked very much, I think, some of the creativity around you thinking of new technology, blockchain technology and innovations. We will actually say that we were impressed by your response to the question about how feasible is a mechanism to review investments. And we have decided to give you a total of 15 points. So congratulations to you both for two excellent presentations.
Thank you, Renata. And for those of you keeping score at home, you didn't have to keep score at home. I'm here to give you the final scores as they stand at present, full in the knowledge that this is your moment to make your decision on either what you think is the most feasible and functional first step for NATO to take now, or what you would very much like to see happen in the next decade. And your vote counts, well, not quite as much as the judges, but almost as much. So let's go through the scores as they stand right now, remembering your favorite pitches, or maybe the university to which you feel the greatest emotional affinity. Those points count too. So let's just review, knowing that in just a moment, polls will open and you can potentially push your team across the finish line. So King's College London, 13 points. Sciences Po Paris, 15 points. Simon Fraser University in from Canada with a strong 16.5 points, 16.5 points. Tromsø University, 11 points. Portucalense University, 14 points. Harvard University, right in lockstep with the Canadian colleagues at 16.5 points. Charles University in Prague, 14.5 points, very much in reach. The Freie Universität Berlin leading the pack with their technology solutions at 18.5 points. Johns Hopkins University at 15 points, and Vilnius, who we just saw just now and heard from Renata, 13.5 points. So the team to beat currently is the Freie Universität Berlin, or you can be responsible for putting them over the top. Polling will start in just a moment. But before we turn to polling, it is my discreet pleasure and honor, frankly, to introduce you to Mircea Joana, a longtime friend of the Future of Diplomacy Project in Harvard University, a truly born, effectively transatlanticist with leading roles in his own country in Romania before taking up his role as the Deputy Secretary-General of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, where frankly, over the very short time still of his appointment, he has done phenomenal work investing and leaning into this particular portfolio of work. So with great honor and great pleasure, Mircea Joana.
Oh, thank you, Catherine. So good to reconnect. We are good friends, and I really appreciate your talent and your drive and your sophistication. So I'm so happy to be together with you. And also, basically, this is the end of a long day, but I think I've been looking forward to this moment for a couple of days now. This is nothing more pleasant and rewarding than to see so many bright young leaders engaging and caring about the future of our alliance. And what a fantastic event this has been. And congratulations to all of you, to the universities, the students, and indeed the leaders that have competed in this first NATO policy hackathon. And of course, like always, I'm the only one, in between the announcement of the results and the end of this great event. But I would like to say a few words, just from me. Secretary-General Stoltenberg asked me also to chair the Innovation Board in NATO. I'm a true believer in leadership and engaging with the youth. And I think the end of this first approach of the sort for us in NATO, I know it was a very busy week for all of you. I know, and I watched not all of the projects, but some of the presentations, and it's so much work behind it. There's so much intensity. There's so much bright ideas over there. So I think we'll have to continue even after the announcements to chew upon the ideas that you have been launching. And if I'm looking also to the topics, the thrust of the projects that you have decided to present in this first NATO hackathon, I'm amazed. I'm truly amazed by the fantastic overlap between the projects you have chosen and the fundamental trends of our democratic societies and the foundation on which NATO is built. Many projects are speaking and presenting smart ideas about values. That's the underlying foundation of this alliance. This is the cradle of who we are. This is if you want, the most fundamental ingredient of NATO's enduring success. Then many of you have been presenting ideas on climate change. Again, this is one of the most dominant trends shaping our planet and, of course, shaping also the security which is coming, and security challenges coming from climate change. Then, as I mentioned, I've seen many projects on technology. This is, again, one of the most aggressive, rapid, and overarching transformations of security, but also of human mankind. And at last, resilience. Because many of the projects are speaking about economic resilience, about democratic resilience, how to fight disinformation, how to keep our democracies healthy and strong. I'm just amazed by the sophistication of the propositions, but also by the values, by the imagination, and the intense belief in our values that all of you have shown. So I just cannot say how happy, how proud I am, and how much we have been enjoying this, but not only enjoying, because seeing young, smart leaders is always a joy for us from an older generation, but is also a sign of the vitality and the depth of the foundation on which our alliance is built. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. The same thing goes, you've seen Secretary-General Stoltenberg just a little bit earlier on. I like to thank also Catherine. I like to thank Lead Innovation for helping us craft this thing, and also the amazing academic institutions that you all represent. We are proud of you. I cannot be finishing a long day of work at NATO here in the NATO headquarters in Brussels than being witness to this great experiment of ours. Keep it up. We'll persevere. We count on you. And I can consider you already as part of the NATO innovation ecosystem. Good luck, and I'm looking forward to see who's going to win this. Everybody wins. We all win. Thank you so much.
Mr. Deputy Secretary-General, thank you for those reflections. I think what I took away most is the importance of NATO as a node for not only smart, deep thinking, but for connecting people, frankly, from all over its member states. And here even we have people who are not part of its member states, who believe so deeply in the fundamental values that NATO represents in the Washington Treaty, that they are willing to take it forward at great cost and over a long time and fueled by much coffee. But in a way, I think that NATO can hook really into very practical approaches that will make NATO's future vivid for NATO's citizens. And I think underscoring the value of NATO to all of us in this way with these diverse voices has made me profoundly optimistic this morning, in this American morning. So without further ado, now comes the voting. Now comes your role in this hackathon. The judges have done their job. So we're opening the poll right now. Please go over to slido.com. Remember, NATO 2030 is your ticket to play, your ticket to vote. Things are already moving very, very quickly. And as this voting goes on, and I want to remind you, it's a short period of time. It's a very quick minute. What is at stake are 5 bonus points for the winner of the audience poll, 3 bonus points for the runner-up, and 2 bonus points for number 3. And as you do this, I really want you to meet all these fantastic students who have made this day possible. Here's a short clip of who they are. Hello.
Hola.
Hi.
Hola.
The opportunity to come together with students from all over the world to put together a policy that might help NATO overcome some of the challenges it's currently facing.
I've been always seeking possibilities and opportunities, how to change the things around me and how to make the world a better place. And I think this is a great opportunity how I can contribute to changing something.
I think us being younger, being more, globalist, well-traveled will really help to bring in some different perspectives, outside perspectives that NATO can really use.
Today we're seeing many historical alliance or treaties that are being criticized because saying that they're not helpful for today's world. So I think that having the youth getting involved, it can help modernize this alliance.
To discuss if it should engage in a more political way or in a more military way.
Make everyone come together and try and look outside of their own borders, to try and act together
finding a way to really create more common ground among people and sort of start bringing people together.
The changing environment and the climate change.
Articulate its policies around the new security challenges.
Collaboration is needed because tough times are coming and we all need to help each other, and I hope NATO embraces this new strategy.
Well, I hope that too. The poll has closed. Over 700 of you pushed those buttons, and now the moment we have all been waiting for, landing it exactly on time, the presentation of the final results of the first ever NATO hackathon. Let's see the results. All right, I guess we're still tabulating. We must be very, very close. I hope that we can not only see the results of the polling, but also so that I can hopefully announce, hopefully with great fanfare, not unlike Graham Norton at the Eurovision Song Contest for all the British watching. I think we have the slide ready. Okay, the pitch that won the audience vote. Look at this, 954 people voting. The additional 5 points go to Sciences Po. Then we have Charles University Prague coming in second place of our audience voting, not the full pitch. And Freie Universität Berlin, who we will recall was already very much at the top of the game, gets those 2 remaining points. So with all that math being done, I hope that to not confuse anything, I hope that I get my final winner from NATO, and I'm looking at the screen right here with the final tabulations. And dun, 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 drum roll. Let's see if I can do it myself. I want to get one clear answer from our colleagues at NATO who are keeping final track. I've been sent a very tiny, for old people's eyes, Excel spreadsheet, but perhaps anticipated entirely, the winners of the first NATO hackathon from my other country, of which I bear a red passport. My heartiest congratulations to the Freie Universität Berlin.
Thank you so much. I would like to use it as a quick shout out to our team at Freie Universität, but also to LEAD and also to all the other teams who've been competing. I've been really amazed at all the pitches. So I think the applause really goes to everybody who's participated. Yeah, thank you so much. And also thanks to the public for voting for us.
Well, I think this has been an enormous success. I've taken copious notes on NATO's future, and I know that our colleagues at NATO have done the same. Stefan, our heartiest congratulations to you, to all of our fantastic teams. And again, you did not see this in the chat, but you will, if you paid close attention to the hackathons briefs themselves, know that they offered integrated solutions to one another's problems. So I leave this morning, my time, with great optimism, great hope for the future, knowing that these are implementable ideas for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization as it readies for its important summit this summer. And as an educator, as someone who teaches and researches the future of the transatlantic relationship, my God, do I have high hopes for you. And I hope that good hiring contracts from NATO and otherwise are forthcoming, because we need your talent, we need your energy, we need your commitment to our democracies and to upholding the oldest functional military alliance in the world. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for being here. Congratulations to all teams. Be well, be safe, be healthy.